Statute 10:4-10, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to a newspaper of record, has been posted here in City Hall. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and the quorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. This meeting is being conducted virtually via video conferencing in lieu of meeting in the council chamber at Summit City Hall, Summit, New Jersey. This meeting is being live streamed to the city's YouTube page. Members of the public can view the meeting by following the link provided on the agenda. Dennis Galvin is the zoning board's attorney. He will advise the board members on matters of law and is the interface with an applicant's attorney. Mr. Galvin does not vote on the applications. Chris Nicola is a city employee and is the zoning board secretary. Mr. Nicola works with applicants on getting their applications together, planning our agendas, and keeping our meeting minutes. Mr. Nicola also does not vote on the applications. Our board consists of 7 regular members and up to 4 alternates. All members can participate in hearing tonight, but a maximum of 7 can vote. Most applications require a simple majority to be approved. Some applications require 5 affirmative votes to be approved. You'll be told which majority will be required before we begin our deliberations. Mr. Nicola, please call the roll of the members.
Chairman Yuko.
Here.
Vice Chairman Spur.
Here.
Mr. Laderi is excused. Mr. Steiner.
Here.
Mr. Newell.
Here.
Mr. Mullen.
Here.
Ms. Schwartzstein is excused. Ms. Hensel is excused. Mr. Millay.
Here.
And Mr. Loikitz is not here yet, but we are expecting him at this time.
Okay. We generally hear the cases in the order they are listed on the agenda. We try to have each hearing last no more than 30 minutes, but we do understand that some cases are too complex to be heard within that time frame. Each hearing begins with the applicant or their attorney giving an overview of the application and the variances that are required. We then hear from any expert witnesses the applicant may have to help explain the application and why the variances are needed. The board members may ask questions of the applicant, their attorney, and the expert witnesses. Once the board members and the board professionals are done with their questioning, the public will have an opportunity to ask questions. This is not the time to tell us what you think about this case. That opportunity comes at the end of the hearing. Before you ask your questions, we need to know who you are and where you live. It is important that our court reporter be able to keep a clear and accurate public record. Please state your name before speaking or asking a question, and please do not talk over each other. This is even more important under the current circumstances. After all witnesses have been heard, members of the audience have their second opportunity to speak, and at that time they express their opinion, positive or negative, about the application. Then the public hearing is closed and we go into executive session where the board members discuss the case and vote. You'll be able to listen to our executive session, but you will not normally be able to participate in our discussion. Most applications are heard and decided in the same evening. If a case requires additional information or testimony that cannot be presented tonight, we will carry the case to another date and it will not be decided tonight. Mr. Anderson, the city's zoning officer, has asked I remind all applicants that they must read carefully the resolution that documents the zoning board's decision and pay particular attention to conditions contained in the resolution. For example, if a landscaping plan is required, you must obtain one and submit it to John Linson, the city's forester. If a grading plan is required, you must have one prepared by a civil engineer and submit 3 copies along with the application fee to the city's engineering division. Failure to satisfy all conditions in a resolution will result in a delay in approving your application, as will cause extra work for city zoning staff. The resolutions documenting the board's decision will normally be available 1 month after we decide the case. When I call your name, please tell me how many witnesses you have and whether you think you can complete your case within 30 minutes. Tonight we have 2 cases, both are First is Bergen Capital Partners, LLC, 38-40 Park Avenue.
Good evening. Craig Feldman here for the applicant.
Could you just refresh me, how many witnesses do we have left for you tonight? Who do we have left?
We will have our engineer will speak briefly some revisions in the site plan. Our traffic engineer will also speak as to those revisions and also be available for public comment. And then finally, our planner, who hasn't testified yet.
Okay. And the second case on the agenda is Jonathan Flax, 57 Prospect Street.
Mr. Chairman, good evening. Rob Simon from Herald Law.
Bart Sheehan from Dempsey and Sheehan for the
interested neighbor, Burke.
And Mr. Simon, where are we with your witnesses? How many witnesses do we have left for you?
So all we have left is our engineer, just to go over the limited revisions to the landscaping plan. We have the certified landscape architect, just to add some comments to that plan. And then we have our professional planner, Mr. Steck.
Okay. And it just occurred to me, I didn't track attendance for, who may have needed to read transcripts. Do we have an issue tonight with people having to certify that they've read transcripts, and how would we do that now?
I have to certify for the first case, and I will certify on the record, I guess.
Dennis, is that enough to allow him to vote?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll get them to sign, as long as you've reviewed the transcript?
I have.
Cool, we'll just get you over, maybe Chris can email you something, you'll sign it, you send it back.
Okay. All right, then we will begin with
Wait a
Bergen
minute, wait, do we have Mr. Locutus? Do we have 7? We're still at 6?
Yeah, we're at 6, that's right. I don't see Scott anywhere.
Chris, can you call him?
Yeah, hold on.
All right.
All right, let's wait a second. Because if he doesn't hear the testimony, he can't vote, and we only have 6 members. And
Now our plan is to hear the second case when the first case is over, right?
yes.
And when do we think we'll do that? You guys want to, Mr. Simon, Mr. Sheehan, you guys want to check back in?
It would be acceptable to me.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to at least go off on the video. With regard to tonight, I was hopeful that we could maybe have a ready hold time, even if it was 10 o'clock.
That's what I'm thinking, right, Mr. Yuko?
Yeah, I think we discussed it earlier, and if it gets to be 10 o'clock and it looks like, the child care center, we're not done or not going to be done, I think the Flax case is a better candidate to finish tonight, so we might adjourn the child care center at that time. And
I don't see Mr. Feldman. Oh, Craig. Okay, do you understand what we're plotting here?
No, and I was already given the heads up for the 10 o'clock time frame, and we're reasonably confident we will hit that.
Good.
Yeah, I think if the testimony is expeditious and to the point, I'm hopeful we can do that.
Dennis,
Yeah, board.
in the unlikely event that the child care finishes before 10 o'clock, maybe Chris can send a text to Rob and myself so that the board's time is used most effectively.
I like that idea. I
Thank you, Bart.
don't see either one of you having to hang on for 2 hours needlessly. But if we
Well,
don't
I might learn something, Dennis, so you never know.
That can happen. I hear, Mr. Feldman's got a lot to teach.
Looking forward to it.
Stand by.
All right, I don't see Mr.
Thank you.
Wykic here, so let's
You wanna
actually
do
go
the rest?
off the record for a minute till we hear back from Mr. Wykic.
All right.
Dennis, why can't I see Rob?
I don't know.
I'm back.
So I spoke with Mr. Woikitz. He'll be here in the next minute or so.
Okay, then let's stay off the record and wait till he joins.
Hey, Chris?
Yeah.
You want to approve resolutions or minutes or?
Oh,
Yeah, we could do that.
all right, let's go back on the record and do that. Okay.
Okay, first resolution was for 9 Prospect Hill Avenue, application ZB 19-2005. Eligible voting members are Mr. Steiner, Vice Chairman Spur, Ms. Newell, Mr. Malay, and Chairman Yuko. Would someone like to make a motion?
So moved. Stevens.
Second.
Mr. Steiner,
Yes.
Mr. Spur,
Yes.
Ms. Newell,
Yes.
Mr. Malay,
Yes.
and Chairman Yuko.
Yes.
Okay, next resolution is for 162 Oak Ridge Avenue, application ZB 19-2010. Eligible voting members are Vice Chairman Spur, Ms. Newell, Mr. Steiner, Mr. Mullen, and Chairman Yuko. Would somebody like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Vice Chairman Spur,
Yes.
Ms. Newell,
Yes.
Mr. Steiner, Mr. Steiner,
Yes.
Mr. Mullen,
Yes.
and Chairman Yuko.
Yes.
All right, and last resolution is for 149 Hillcrest Avenue, application ZB 19-2001. Eligible voting members are Vice Chairman Spur, Ms. Newell, Mr. Steiner, Mr. Mullen, and Chairman Yuko. We need a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Vice Chairman Spur,
Yes.
Ms. Newell,
Yes.
Mr. Steiner,
Yes.
Mr. Mullen,
Yes.
and Chairman Yuko.
Yes.
And then we have a set of minutes from May 18th to approve. Need a motion for that as well.
So moved.
And
Second.
we need a second. Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, and for the record, Mr. Wyckes did just join.
Okay, very good. All right, so let's move to Bergen Capital Partners, 38 Dashway Park Avenue, Mr. Feldman.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. This is our third hearing in this matter for use variance and site plan approval for a learning experience childcare center. The first hearing was on January 8th, 2020. Charles Schweiker, our architect, spoke on all matters of architecture as well as the operations of the childcare center. We had our second hearing on February 19th. At that time, Ms. Schweiker came back, supplemented her testimony in regard to the playground, the pantry, as well as exterior signage. And on that day, she concluded her testimony. Also at that hearing, we heard from Jerry Cesario, our professional engineer, who spoke to all issues regarding the site, including landscaping, signage, lighting, etc. Mr. Cesario also concluded that evening. And also at the second hearing, we heard from John Korak, our traffic engineer, who testified as to ingress, egress, circulation, and parking. He did conclude his direct testimony that evening. The board did ask him some questions, but the public did not have the opportunity to question him, so he's going to be reintroduced this evening. One of the things that occurred during his testimony, there was a question raised concerning whether we should have one-way traffic through the site versus two-way traffic. And so we went back to the drawing board on that, and after due consideration, we were able to redraw the traffic pattern. So it's one way only through the site. And our revised site plan dated March 16, 2020 reflects that one-way traffic. Also during that testimony, during Mr. Cesario's testimony, a question was raised regarding the exterior refuse container. And so we looked at that issue as well. And we're happy to report that we've been able to completely remove the exterior container from the site plan. So going forward, the trash will be collected in a designated room inside the building, and we'll provide testimony in that regard later in this evening. And as a result of some of these changes, which is the one-way traffic, as well as the moving of the exterior refuse bin, we're happy also to report that we're able to get 4 additional on-site parking spaces. So while previously we were providing 19 on-site spaces, we're now providing 23. So we'll be recalling Mr. Cesario tonight to speak briefly about those changes to the site plan. And then equally, when Mr. Korak comes back, he'll be amending his testimony as it applies to the changes in the site plan, namely the one-way traffic, as well as the increased parking on site. We also have available our planner this evening, Christine Cafone, who'll be providing expert testimony in regard to all the variances and planning in general. Finally, there was a question raised at the last hearing from an architectural standpoint as to whether on the facade, we would be interested in having at the second level siding as compared to the what we call the hardy panels, the hardy plank panels that we were showing. And the answer is we're amenable to it. So whatever the board decides in that regard, whether it be hardy panel or siding, we're fine either way. I will leave that to the board's discretion. We did receive copies of the various amended staff reports from the town, and we'll be providing answers and addressing those tonight. And we have no material objections to any of the comments. At this time, if there's any questions, if there's no questions, I'm prepared to call Mr. Gisario.
Any preliminary questions for Mr. Feldman? Seeing none, let's proceed.
Okay. Mr. Gisario?
Good evening. I'm going to share my screen. I have one exhibit. Mr. Feldman summarized the significant changes on the site. I'll just review them with the aid of an updated site exhibit, color site exhibit. Let me share.
We're going to mark that.
That's been marked as A14.
All right. And could you spell your last name for the record?
Sure. It's G-E-S as in Sam, A-R-I-O.
Thank you. You're still under oath. You may proceed.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully it works.
Very impressive.
So everyone can see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is an updated color exhibit, A14 now. It's drawing E200 with the date of March 6th, 2020. As I mentioned, Mr. Feldman summarized the significant changes. I'll just review them again with the help of this picture. As he mentioned, the main parcel, we've adjusted or changed the flow so it's one-way traffic, one-way in off Park. And you can see the hand on the screen, and one-way out Dorn Cottage. One of the things we didn't change yet is the driveway widths, which was a comment in a review letter. We can certainly, now that this is one-way, we can certainly narrow those widths down to an 18-foot at the curb in response to that comment. The second change is we were able to add, with this change, we tweaked the parking area in this corner, which would be the southwest corner. There was a little bump out there, and we got one additional spot along the face of the building. So we have 13 spaces in the main lot where before we had 12, and 7 are right up against the building. The third change and a significant change was the trash enclosure, which was previously located in the northeast corner of the accessory lot 5. We've eliminated that. All the trash will be handled internally. The architectural plans were revised. So there's a door on the inside. So the trash has access from inside the building and outside. The trash will be picked up basically as needed. It's going to change as enrollment changes. So, it could be once or twice a week when they start out. It could be as many as 3 times a week. It's going to depend on enrollment and the use. So that'll be picked up in an as needed fashion, and it could be as much as 3 times a week. As Mr. Feldman mentioned, when we eliminated that trash enclosure, we opened up some room here and we added 3 parking spots to the accessory lot. So previously we had 7, we now have 10 spaces there. So our new project total is 23 spaces, where previously we had 19 spaces. And that's the summary of the changes, the significant changes we made for this submission. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Dower, do you want to ask any questions of this witness?
Not at this time. I think they've agreed, my understanding is they've agreed to all the comments in the engineer's report, which mostly were on lighting, and then just updating all these changes as far as the one-way flow. I guess the other question Krista did also ask in her comments about the access into the lot 5 parking lot, about reducing that that access aisle as well to 18 feet.
The aisle itself, we need to maintain 24 because it's the, perpendicular parking. I think I testified previously for the curb cut. We think the 24 is more appropriate for this type of use. So, a car can be waiting to come out and another car has room to pull in if they want to. If we narrow that down, I'm afraid the cars wants to pull out, the car will have to stop on the street and wait for that car to come out before they come in. So I think for this use, the 24-foot curb cut is appropriate.
Okay. I don't have any objection to that. So, and as I said, the lighting, you've agreed to all of that. And the trees to be removed on lot 5, there's still the 10 trees being removed.
Yeah, a few more had to be removed when we added the one extra parking spot in the top right, but yes, that's correct. I think it was 10.
Okay, and I don't know offhand if the forester has seen the revised plans. I don't, Chris Nicola, do you know offhand?
He has, we have a letter, one of the responses we do have from him.
Okay,
Yeah, he is satisfied. He had one comment, which I need to clarify with him about plants in a site triangle. He referenced lot 5, which is the accessory lot, but I think he's referring to the main parcel at Cottage Lane. There's a little landscaping over here. So I just need to clarify that with him, but he, from what I can read, he's satisfied with the landscape plan.
okay, and I think the other comment I made was that end parking space when people back out, that's still going to be very tight. Can you say anything on that?
The last two by the furthest to the residential property?
Right on lot 5.
Yeah, we actually ran today at Auto Turn, and we used a 19-foot car. That's tight. They have to make a little bit of a kind of a K-type maneuver if it's, a 19-foot long car. The typical car, average 15, 16 feet. It can handle it pretty easily. So not ideal. So a 19, 20-foot long car has to make a little bit of a K-turn if there are spots filled there. Your typical car that's 14 to 16 feet has a much easier time and can make that, can back out and swing in fairly easily. So we checked that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I have nothing else.
All right, just go back to the forester's report for a second. You did note it's a much improved landscape plan, so my compliments on that. In terms of addressing his triangle obstruction concerns, we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, Mr. Galvin, can we somehow put a condition in there that the forester's concern has to be clarified and addressed to his satisfaction?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, there seems to be some dispute between Mr. Giuserio and Mr. Linson over what lot this issue applies to, which of the two lots. I think Mr. Giuserio sounds like they're willing to address it, but they need to be sure exactly if he meant lot 5 or the other lot. I forget what that lot number is.
Is approval of a landscaping plan a condition of the application, and it just resolves it that way?
Wait, who's speaking right now?
Oh, sorry, this is Steven Spur. Is approval of a landscaping plan a condition of the application and addresses that issue?
I can do that. That's easier.
Okay.
We have no objection to that.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Well, let's go down the list of board members. Mr. Spur, any other questions for this witness?
I would just only ask Mr. Galvin, just so we're all on the same page, are there any other conditions on the application we should be aware of? I hear approval of the engineer's letter and approval of the landscaping plan. Is there anything else?
That's all I have at this point.
I don't have any further questions at this time.
Mr. Steiner, any questions for this witness?
Not quite sure
Your volume's very low, Mr. Sarno. We can't hear you, or I can't hear you anyway.
I'll try it this way.
You're on mute, Joe.
I know. I know. I was trying to get it off a different way.
No problem.
How does this change? There was a parking variance. Does this change that parking variance?
There's still a parking variance. I think required is 26. We previously had 19. Now we have 23. So it's less of a variance under this plan.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you had fully mitigated it or not. I could not find my notes. Okay. Does that make any changes to the report of your parking consultant?
Our consultant will be addressing these changes this evening
Okay,
and
so he's coming back.
amending his testimony as it applies to these two items, the one-way traffic and the parking.
And someone will be telling us about how to deal with the trash inside the building?
Jerry, would you mind handling that?
Yeah. The trash inside gets, as often as it's needed to be picked up. What's inside, I believe they're 1.5 yard plastic rollouts. So a service will come, these will get rolled out. They'll basically take the trash off site.
Can you show me where it will come out of the building and where it will roll and through what? And where will the truck park when it's picking it up?
Well, it's going to be after hours. So this door, I believe it's this door I'm pointing with the screen. I'll call it the front left of the building. And I'm just, if I say something incorrect, our architect Cheryl is here, she can correct me, but.
Yeah, Jerry, I think that's the wrong side. Cheryl, would you mind chiming in?
Well, this is the utility room on this side.
Sure, let me, I can pull up the floor plan.
And Cheryl, if you don't mind,
Is
can you
testimony
introduce
the way
yourself?
this should go? Or
Yeah.
should somebody be sworn or what?
She's previously under oath, Joe. So we just need her to spell her name.
Oh, we just lost the screen. The share
Sure.
screen just disappeared.
Can you see me?
Yes, now we can see you, Cheryl. Spell your last name.
Sure, it's SCHWEIKER.
And you remain under oath as well. Please proceed.
Thank you. So I will share my screen. All right, so if you see on the floor plan here, the near the toddler's room, we added a trash room that has a door directly to the outside, and it is also accessed from inside the classroom as well.
Cheryl, which road is that doorway facing for everyone's benefit?
Sure, let me, Jerry, do you have your site plan?
I believe it's facing Park Avenue. Is that correct, Jerry?
Yes, it should be.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct, Greg.
So that, and then there's a sidewalk, I believe, once they exit that door, they can walk along the sidewalk to the parking area. Is that correct?
That's correct. So they can wheel the trash containers to a pickup location coordinated with the company.
Which will be in the parking lot.
Well, it'll be
Or in the
coordinated with.
street, which is it
One
gonna
at a
be?
time, please.
It will need to be coordinated with the trash company as to where they would want the bins located for their pickup. So it might be on the street or on the corner in the parking lot.
Okay, are these bins going to be left unattended until the trash man gets there? Or are they going to be taken out at the time that the truck arrives?
So the ideal situation would be to not have them out sitting on the street for a long period of time. And as they understand when the trash pickup occurs, they will put the bins out close to the pickup time.
So there is a possibility that bins could be sitting on the sidewalk or in the parking lot for an hour or two in the evening.
That may be the case, yes.
This is
Is that
Mr. Mullen.
Is
Sorry.
is that industry standard? The trash, I mean? Does anybody know, Chris?
Hold on, everybody.
Industry standard as far as what the size bins that they're proposing?
I'm sorry, I missed your,
Okay.
Size bins?
Yeah, the bins that you're saying that they are this industry standard. I mean, this is versus having a regular garbage can. They're going to be wheeled containers, probably just bigger type garbage cans. The other alternative, I can see your point where you wouldn't want to have them sitting on the sidewalk for any length of time. There is a possibility, I guess, they could either, as you said, wheel them up to the front of the building. Alternatively, they could possibly put them right around the corner on Cottage, but I'd leave that up to the applicant, whichever would work better.
Are there any ordinances that apply here as to when garbage can put out on the curb and when it's not? I know in residential neighborhoods, there are ordinances for that.
Right. The commercial, I don't believe so, but maybe Tom, do you know offhand?
I do not. For a private site, if there's any, I don't off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know either, Tom.
Okay.
well, that remains then a concern for me because we all talked about the fact of the odoriferousness of the potential of this trash because we're talking about toddlers and diapers, et cetera. So I wouldn't want to be in a neighborhood where for 2 or 3 hours, 3 times a week, I have that situation sitting open in my neighborhood.
If I may, all the trash will be in double trash bags, just like anyone putting trash out to the curb. We certainly can make as a condition of approval that we do not have anything overnight, any trash left out overnight, and we will work with the town to ensure that the trash pickup is very close to the time period that we put it out.
Yeah, I'd say maybe condition something like it will be put out the day of collection and as close to the actual collection time as possible.
Absolutely, and that is exactly what we do. I think we're to the extent that there's any ambiguity, just trying to time that exactly.
Yeah.
That's the part that we can't guarantee, but the goal is to time it as close as possible, and with the requirement that it does not stay overnight outside.
So on the day of collection, as close as possible to time, and that it will not stay out overnight. So condition
Correct.
something like that.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Steiner?
No, all right.
Ms. Newell, any questions?
I just want to know about the parking. With the additional parking spaces, do you have enough for all of your employees to park now on site?
If you don't mind, we have our traffic consultant that can speak to that. If that's okay.
That's fine.
Any other questions, Ms. Newell?
No, that's it.
Okay. Mr. Mullen, any questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about trash. Going back to the diagram that was recently put on screen, I just want to understand sort of the frequency that trash is going to be collected every week relative to the size of the trash room, because it looks rather small for an operation that's going to service 155 children. So I want to sort of understand the volumes you expect to generate and the feasibility of using that small trash room, both from a health and safety standpoint internally in the facility, as well as being able to comply with the conditions that we just talked about in terms of only taking out trash shortly before collection.
If I may point out that this is a private collection facility that's going to be picking up our trash. we're prepared to have the trash picked up as needed. So for sure, there are locations that we have, city locations, urban locations, where the trash is picked up virtually daily. And then there's some where it's 2 or 3 days a week. And it's just, as operationally, as we have that need and as the center grows, that frequency will change, of course. But obviously, we're going to ensure that the trash is removed as needed, and we have the ability to order them out daily if need be. We're paying for it. It's just a matter of just scheduling it again as it's needed. So just like anything,
specificity here, because you're a national operation, so right. I would imagine you have modeling for 155 children and can understand what your needs are going to be. So I would like to understand the frequency that garbage trucks will be rolling through the neighborhood, and just what frequency you're going to anticipate collecting this trash. I understand it may get adjusted as circumstances dictate, but I would imagine you have a pretty good idea at this point.
As we've also testified, our experts have testified, we're almost never going to be at 155. So that's part of the equation. And secondly, whatever that number ends up being based upon our success as a business, we're prepared to remove the trash daily if need be. We do believe that that room can accommodate at least 1 day of trash based upon our experience. And so we're prepared if need be, if we get to maximum capacity for the building, that we'll have to have a hauler out there once a day to remove the 3-yard bins that are going to get wheeled out to the curb area.
And so you said you're not going to operate at 155. Where do you expect your steady state operation to be in terms of capacity?
Charlie, you want to go through it again?
Just give me, I know I'm backtracking on some stuff that was talked about before, but appreciate it if you'd humor me just with a very brief explanation.
Sure, not a problem. So as I previously testified, the center is designed for licensed capacity of 155 children. We find that there's a certain percentage that are sick, on vacation, not in the center at any one time. We also have a flex room in there that's used as a playroom that is not always to capacity. It's been our experience that most centers operate at about 80% capacity.
So about 125, I guess, for your steady state.
In a steady state.
Okay, and would that necessitate, what do you think, trash pickup 5 days a week? Or...
So the trash room has been designed to accommodate 3 bins that would, as Craig stated, would accommodate trash for a day at full occupancy.
Thank you.
Mr. Male, any questions?
No, not for this.
Okay. Mr. Liketz, any questions for this witness?
No question.
Okay. Anybody in the public have any questions for this witness?
Yes, this is Ivanovich. I have some questions.
Or you have to state your name and address.
Sure. Ivanovich, 53 Park Avenue, Summit, New Jersey.
Can you spell your last name?
Novich.
Thank you.
Okay, so my first question is with respect to Cottage Lane, that's a residential neighborhood that is on Cottage Lane, and there are small children who live in that neighborhood. And now I understand from the redesigned traffic flow that it's going to be one way coming into Cottage Lane. Are there any safety measures or precautions being taken to protect the children who live on that street?
This is Jerry. There's no additions to the plan with that regard. The street obviously has a 90-degree bend in it and a slow speed limit. Our plan does not propose anything particular on Cottage Lane.
So I'm a resident. I've lived here for 13, 14 years, and I can tell you there's very little traffic now that goes behind there on Cottage Lane. And you have children, you have low-income children, who, mainly renters, who are playing soccer on that street, who are playing ball constantly. And what you're proposing is a steady flow of parents and trucks, and garbage.
Or I'm gonna cut you off because we just questions at this time. If you want to, you can have comments later on, positive or negative. But if you just ask questions at this time.
Yeah. I was just asking if is there anything that he's doing to account for that?
As I stated, we're not proposing any specific measures on Cottage Lane.
I have an additional question with regard to the garbage. I understand now that we're moving the dirty diaper dumpsters inside the facility, and that there's going to be regular pickups as needed. Do you know how many times there's garbage pickup on Park Avenue now?
I do not.
It's once a week. What you're proposing is you could be up to 5 times a week.
Yes.
It could be multiple times a day, go with garbage trucks.
No, it wouldn't be multiple times a day.
But it could be 5 times a week.
Possibly, probably not.
Has the number of employees that was originally proposed changed? The original plan was 23 employees, 21 teachers, and 2 staff members. That was the original application. Has that number, the number of employees, changed?
I can answer that. No, that has not changed.
But you did bump up the number of parking spots from 19. Now we have 23.
Correct.
Total of 23 for 23 employees.
Correct. There's total 23 spaces. Maximum total employees would be 23. But I think Ms. Schweiker testified previously that you would rarely have 23 employees on hand at all at one time.
Not going by somebody else.
I may clarify also, it was Mr. Korak that testified as to the expected employee demand from a parking standpoint at this location, and he'll be testifying again as to that, the traffic engineer.
I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public have any questions for this witness? Okay, hearing none, Mr. Feldman, you may call your next witness.
Okay, I'd like to reintroduce John Korak.
Good evening.
John, spell your last name, kid.
Sure, C-O-R-A-K.
All right, you're still under oath. You may proceed.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Korak, will you be referring to any reports this evening in connection with your testimony?
I'll be referring to my traffic impact study, which was last revised December 2nd, 2019.
Okay. I'd like to take you back to some of your prior testimony. Previously, did you testify that this parcel provided safe ingress and egress and could handle AM drop-off with that material queuing?
Yes, I did.
All right. And at the time you provided that testimony, how many spaces were dedicated for a parent drop-off?
We had previously dedicated 5 spaces for parent drop-off.
All right. And have you reviewed the revised site plan that Mr. Gisario has testified to?
Yes, I have.
All right. And can you, as a traffic person, just briefly speak to those changes that apply to your testimony?
Certainly. So the primary change on site is that one-way circulation with an entrance on Park Avenue and then right turn egress onto Cottage Lane, which is a one-way street. We also were able to add parking throughout the site. We were able to pick up 1 additional space on the main lot and 3 additional spaces on the accessory parcel by removing the outdoor trash enclosure on that lot.
All right. And based upon the changes to the site plan, including the one-way traffic and the additional parking, is it your opinion that the site provides safe ingress and egress?
Yes, it is.
All right. I think previously, I'm sorry, one more question. And also, do you believe, in your opinion, that the AM drop-off can be achieved without any material queuing onto Park Avenue?
Yes, I do.
All right. And so, in your professional opinion, have the site driveways and on-site layout been designed to provide for effective access to and from the property, including circulation within the property?
Yes, they have.
Okay. Next, I'd like to take it back to your testimony in regard to the parking. Do you recall Summit's parking requirement, its parking ordinance as applies to childcare centers?
Yes, I do. The ordinance requires a beginning number of 3 spaces and then 1 additional space for each employee of the childcare center. In our case,
yeah, please.
In our case, with 23 employees, that's a total of 26 spaces required.
All right. And previously, did you testify that the on-site and off-site parking would be sufficient for this project?
I did, yes.
Okay. And at the time you provided that testimony, how many spaces were being provided on-site?
We were previously proposing 19 spaces.
All right. And after the revisions to the site plan, how many spaces are being provided in total?
23 total.
So it went from 19 to 23.
Correct.
All right. And just, if you don't mind, one more time, how many spaces are being provided for parent drop-off?
We have increased the parent drop-off area to provide 6 spaces in the parking area along the building frontage, the front door of the building. That does not include the ADA accessible space, so that's an additional space. But again, that's limited to ADA accessible placard holders.
Okay. Now, I believe I recall from your prior testimony that you explained that you had done reviews of other learning experience locations throughout New Jersey. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And based upon those reviews, you were able to determine what the AM peak parking requirement was for those employees. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how many how many did you determine would be needed? How many spaces would be needed for AM peak at this location?
It was 17 spaces required for employees
Okay.
at this location.
And after deducting the number of designated drop-off for parents, how many are left for employee parking at this property?
So when we take away the 6 parking spaces out of the 23, and then also remove the 1 ADA space, there'd be 16 remaining spaces for the 17 employee vehicles. So we're 1 space short on that parking. But I will add that there is very much sufficient on-street parking in the immediate site vicinity, notably on Orchard Street, also on Cottage Lane, to accommodate that 1 extra vehicle from employee parking demand.
So if you don't mind, I believe you previously testified you had done your own site visit and did a parking count for all street parking. Is that correct?
We did, yes. We conducted those counts during the morning, midday, and evening period. Found that parking utilization within a 5-minute walk of the site was under 50%. So more than half of the available parking spaces were available for on-street parking throughout the course of the day.
All right. And can you describe where the nearest on-street parking is to this property?
So really there's on-street parking available on all streets bounding the site. The on-street parking availability is located on the opposite side of the street of the main parcel. Probably the Orchard Street parking location directly adjacent to the accessory lot would be the closest parking spaces, but also there is parking available on Cottage Lane, as well as 1-hour parking on Park Avenue. It's typically used by the businesses in the area and wouldn't be used by employees of this site.
Is either the Cottage Lane or Orchard Street parking in any way limited by time requirements?
No.
So it's unlimited time for those two streets?
That's correct.
Okay. So based on your professional opinion, do you believe that the combination of the 23 on-site spaces together with the availability of off-site street parking would be sufficient to support this project?
I do. I believe that the parking supply can support both the pickup drop-off operations and the employee parking in conjunction with the available on-street supply surrounding the immediate vicinity of the site.
I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dower, do you have any questions for this witness, or Mr. Variance for that matter? Anybody, either of you have questions?
I don't have any questions, no.
I don't.
Mr. Variance, any?
I don't.
Okay. Mr. Spur, any questions for this witness?
Just two questions. Given the bifurcation of the parking, and I apologize if you're not the appropriate person for this question, because of the bifurcation of the parking, and because lot 5 is to be attributed solely to employees, is it appropriate to include an ADA compliant spot in that location to accommodate the needs of employees?
That's a good question. I would probably defer that to the engineer, who's a bit more of an expert on the ADA aspects, but my understanding is it wouldn't be required for that lot.
And then my second question, and this is related to some comments from a neighbor that spoke earlier, is we've seen the traffic flow of the lot change since the prior session. Is it your opinion that any further traffic calming devices, be them signage or otherwise, is appropriate or recommended on Cottage Lane? Not necessarily that the applicant could impose that, but do you believe would be appropriate given the additional traffic flowing through this location?
You know, I think the Cottage Lane and the way it's designed, you know, it's already a fairly narrow street, which helps limit vehicle speeds. There is that more than 90-degree bend in the road, which really keeps the vehicle speeds down. I don't see, you know, certain traffic mitigation measures on the street to necessarily be very effective. I don't think it would slow down traffic very much from the slow speeds that it's already, you know, already be operating at.
John, what is the speed limit on Cottage Lane?
I believe it's 25 miles an hour. However, your ability to get up to that speed is really limited by the fact that, you know, how short that roadway is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Steiner, any questions for this witness?
I noticed in your testimony, you continually seem to focus on the AM drop-off, which is spread out over time. The PM pickup is, at least when we did childcare, which is eons ago, seemed to be very much at the same time. Because of hours of people leaving their employment, they were 4:35, 5:30 or something like that. You'd get a large number of people backing up at the same time. Can you answer some of the same questions that your attorney asked you, but with reference to the PM drop-off in the same manner, or is there a difference, as I kind of perceive there is in the PM drop-off?
Sure. So the reason that we are focusing on that weekday morning period of the AM is because it actually is more concentrated in that morning time period. When we look at the PM, there's a lot of students doing half days. There's a bigger window of pickups for the students that disperses the traffic in a better manner throughout the the evening, or I would say afternoon period. So that's why we're looking at the morning specifically. It tends to be just a little bit more concentrated, but you know, when we look at those same numbers, if we apply them to the evening, took a conservative analysis, my conclusions would remain the same in that there would not be a significant queuing impact, parking, circulation impact associated with this site, and the layout is safe and efficient to support the traffic operations.
All right, no other questions.
Okay, Ms. Newell, any questions?
I'm still concerned about the traffic because there are businesses. There's a Domino's, and I've seen their tractor trailer, dump food there. And it is a street that people cut from, Springfield Avenue to get to Broad Street. So there is a lot more traffic than you think, because I actually grew up on Park Avenue. So I know the area extremely well. So that's my concern. And the backup and Cottage Lane, even when you said they're possibly parking, yes, at the tail tip of it, but it just makes me a little nervous with the amount of cars in an already, overwhelmingly trafficky area. That's just, I don't know, I'm concerned about the children. I'm concerned about the backup that they will have. Can you speak to that? I mean, you think, because you've said that there's not going to be a backup, but there's always a backup. I see it at the TLC just a few blocks away, which is the Y Child Care Center, and I see a backup on Morris Avenue. So there always will be a backup. So how do you propose to ensure that the parents are efficient and making sure that children are safe?
Sure. So when we do our analysis, we do consider those volumes that are on the roadway network. We were out there. We understand, what those traffic progressions are, what those volumes are, and it's certainly going to be an increase on Cottage Lane, which operates as a fairly quiet street. But the level of increase and the level of impact is not such that generates any sort of abnormal or adverse traffic impact to the roadway network. The queuing on Park Avenue, if you're trying to turn into the site, it really wouldn't be any material queuing, for cars trying to turn in. It's just the way that this site operates and the way that these childcare centers operate. It is efficient. There is spread out, pickups and drop-offs that really help disperse the turnover of vehicles throughout a larger period. And based on our experience, developing these, the learning experience, doing post-occupancy studies, we feel strongly that the same experience that we've had at other sites will apply here, and that there won't be significant backups or queuing.
John, can you speak to the study you did of the existing roadway and how it compares to other parts of the town as far as the level of service?
I mean, with the level of service in this area, it's operating at very favorable levels of service. When we take a look at the roadway volumes, they're not anywhere near capacity conditions, so to speak. So, with respect to the impacts of this development, we continue to see good levels of service in this area based on our analysis.
Are other locations of yours subject to similar parking constraints?
We have sites that have similar parking supply. We have sites that have more parking supply. But yeah, there are sites in this range. There's a few that are less in terms of total parking. But in that this 23 spaces right in the wheelhouse for the learning experience and supports their operations favorably.
Ms. Doyle, just to make sure you were done. Do you have any other questions? Okay, Mr. Mullins, do you have any other questions?
I didn't want to cut in front of you.
That's okay. I'm trying to make it easier for the court reporter.
Understood. I want to kind of understand, building on what Liz was talking about, in terms of the pickup time frames. How is dismissal handled? Are children brought to the front and parents pick them up and sort of pull into a space, pull right out, or do the parents actually enter the building to pick up their children?
The parents would enter the building to pick up their child.
Okay, and so let's say you had a situation where all the spaces were filled, and I mean, how do you handle the overflow? What's the plan?
So I think there's a couple things with this site in particular. And with the operation of these childcare centers, is that the employee dismissal is staggered, similar to the way that the child dismissal is staggered, throughout that afternoon period. So as the day goes on, there's a number of parking spaces that do open up that were previously occupied by employees. In the event that all the parking spaces are full in front of the site, we do have circulation on site that allows you to continue off the site and circulate back around, either to park on street or to grab a different parking space that you might have missed prior. It's not like we're working with a dead end parking aisle or something like that, where if you get to the end, on the let's say on the parent pickup side of the lot, you're out of luck and need to find a way to turn around. This site will work effectively, with those circulation constraints in the rare event that they do come up.
Yeah, it seems like if I was going to pick up my kid there and I saw there were no spaces on the lot, I'd pull a right onto Cottage Lane and just wind up parking up Cottage Lane. Do you think that's sort of the reasonable expectation that we can have if the spaces are filled?
Right. On the rare occasion, uncommon occasion that those spaces are all filled, that's certainly an option that's available.
Thank you.
Mr. Molly?
For parents, they also could park 1 hour on park as well.
That's true.
So
is that Mr. Feldman?
Yes. So just to point that out, Park does have parking. Park Avenue has parking. It's not conducive for employee parking, but it does allow for the potential for parent overflow if the need ever arose. So there really is parking on virtually all sides from a parent standpoint of the property.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Male, any questions?
I have a question. Would you be using?
It's audio cut out for me.
Yeah, Mr. Male, you still there?
I think he froze.
Okay.
All right, we'll come back to Mr. Male. Mr. Wyckoff, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, Mr. Male, are you back? Okay. Well, when he gets back, we'll give him another shot. In the meantime, any questions from members of the public for this witness?
Yes, this is Ivanovich. I have some questions.
Okay, just repeat your name and your address again, please.
Sure. Ivanovich, 53 Park Avenue. It's okay to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it Mr. Korak?
That's correct.
Okay. How much work does your firm do for the learning experience?
Just stop for 1 second.
Sure.
Chris, make sure you check on Mr. Malay, okay?
Oh, is he there? Mr. Malay, are you back?
I think we've lost him.
Mr. Malay?
We have to stop.
All right, then we need his testimony. We need his presence. I mean, you're right. Chris, do you have a cell phone number maybe?
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah. Now you're right, Mr. Galvin. He needs to hear all the testimony. You're right.
Mr. Malay, are you back?
There you go. You're on mute, big guy.
Hey, I'm sorry, but my tablet got frozen, so I'm back here on a different.
Mr. Novus, we'll put you on hold for a minute. Let Mr. Malay ask his question. Back to you.
Sure.
Mr. Malay, do you have any questions for this witness?
Yes, I had, first of all, do we have school buses stopping here, picking up, are being used, let's say, for a field trip or something? Any type of vehicle that is larger than normal parents' cars?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, and the other thing, I see here that this cottage lane has been repurposed, I would say, from a very narrow, no sidewalks, very slow alley that served a couple of houses, and then now it's being turned into a driveway for this new facility. And this facility gonna pour back in Park Avenue. I wonder if there were some traffic impact studies done at that time. I guess we spoke about that in previous meetings. However, I didn't see the traffic report. Anyone else saw it maybe? These are my questions.
Okay.
John, also, if you can just remind the board what the current existing condition is.
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
I'm sorry, this is Craig Feldman, I apologize. If you can remind that this is the existing property and what the current sidewalks and the parking areas look like, and how it blends into Cottage Lane, if you don't mind, as well.
Yeah, the existing site is actually a very large curb cut along Cottage Lane. There's not a lot of formal, control for that existing commercial use. And with respect to traffic on Cottage Lane, and we have performed a traffic impact study. It showed very favorable levels of service, even with this proposed development. And the amount of traffic going on to Cottage Lane, it's about 1 vehicle per minute in the peak hours. It really would not have a significant adverse impact on the roadway network. It's a pretty minor volume, all things considered.
The traffic considered, of course, the whole network, and didn't concentrate on Park Avenue itself?
Our traffic study included counts at the intersection of Park Avenue and the intersection of Park and Cottage Lane. So we did include, Park Avenue and the roadway network immediately surrounding the site vicinity.
The traffic would be more of a problem near the uphill where we have the intersection with Broad Street. Was that taken into consideration?
By the time that we get up there, there's going to be some traffic dispersion. The impacts would not be as significant as they would be, in the vicinity of the site. Which again, there wouldn't be a significant adverse impact. We wouldn't expect one up there either.
Okay, these are my questions. Thank you.
Okay. Back to the public, Mr. Novik, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Just please state your name one more time and your address just for the record.
Ivan, I-V-A-N, last name Novich, N-O-V-I-C-H, 53 Park Avenue in Summit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Korak, how much work does your firm do for the learning experience?
Our firm has prepared traffic studies for the learning experience. I think we've done over 30 locations.
And what about the Jarmel firm that owns the learning experience? How much work does your firm do for the Jarmel firm?
I would say a majority of it is childcare centers like the learning experience. I don't have a specific number as to the number of projects with the Jarmel firm.
Is it a significant percentage of the firm's work?
It's not relevant to this application.
Is that you're refusing to answer that question? It goes to your bias and your credibility as a witness. You're not going to answer that?
This is a business question. It's not related to this application.
It goes to your bias and your credibility as an expert witness. You're not going to answer your financial, the amount of work that your firm does for the principal behind the learning experience, and whether your testimony is biased based on the amount of work you're doing. You're going to refuse to answer that.
The testimony is not biased. I'm under oath as a professional engineer.
So answer the question.
Answer the question. How much work does your firm do for the Jarmel firm? It's a significant percentage, isn't it?
Of Stonefield's total work? No.
Well, what percentage of work? What, can you estimate it?
I don't have that estimate. I'm sorry.
All right. Cottage Lane, I think you described it as a fairly narrow street. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And do you know, are any of the residents, the low-income residents that live on Cottage Lane, do you know if any of them are parking on that street already?
We did conduct parking counts. It's generally available throughout the day on Cottage Lane.
So there is parking throughout the day on the narrow street that is Cottage Lane that you want to use as a driveway, right?
There's parking available throughout the day.
No, I was asking you, do the residents park on Cottage Lane, the narrow street?
In our parking counts, we observed 3 cars in the morning, 3 cars at midday, and 2 cars in the evening parked on Cottage Lane. There was an additional capacity of 4 cars in the morning, 4 cars in the midday, and 5 cars in the evening on Cottage Lane.
What about, has your traffic study accounted for fire drills that are regularly conducted at the Learning Experience as a daycare center?
Our traffic impact study considers the vehicular impacts of the site during the peak periods. Is not considered impacts associated with a fire drill.
If I have a copy of your December 2nd, 2019 report in front of me, I had a question you talk about on page 3 of your report. The manual turning movement counts that you use to reach your conclusions, right?
Correct.
Did you do the manual turning movement counts other than one day during the height of the summer when a lot of people are away from work, are off work and away on vacation? You did it on July 30th, 2019. Did you do it on any other day besides that one day of the whole year?
As far as turning movement counts within those periods, no, but we've been out to the site on numerous occasions, observed the traffic while school is in session throughout different seasons throughout the the life of this project.
The manual turning movement counts that you relied up on in your report, that consisted of one day, right?
That's correct, and that's in accordance with the industry standard. That's very typical.
Now you refer on page 8 of your report to the other Learning Experiences locations, right?
Correct.
Okay. And both the Union and the Roseland locations for the Learning Experience have a lot more parking spots than is being allotted here. Isn't that right?
I believe the Union location had 21 spaces, but I would need to confirm.
Yeah. In fact, I've been to that location and it's got well over 25, 26, maybe even 30 spaces. It's a much, do you know the number of spots in that location?
Offhand, I don't have it.
Okay. And what about Roseland? Do you know the number of spots at that location?
Offhand, I do not have it.
What about Livingston? Livingston, you would agree, that has far more than the number of spots that are being allotted here, doesn't it?
And the study that we've conducted is based on Union, Cedar Grove, and Parsippany. So these other sites are not relevant to our study.
Okay, but my question to you is the Livingston location, that has far more greater parking spots than what's being allotted here. Isn't that true?
It's part of a larger office complex, so yes.
Right, it abuts the Jarmel firm, doesn't it?
That's correct.
All right. I want to ask you a question about the parking utilization spot counts. That's on page 9 of your report. And again, that was done on November 12th, 2019. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Was that conducted on any other day other than November 12th, 2019?
Again, we've been out to the site numerous times. We didn't see any material difference in the on-street parking, and we're looking at a utilization that peaked at 42% in our counts. So we're not anywhere near a capacity constraint in terms of the on-street parking availability.
Let me give you that question again since you dodged it. On-street parking utilization counts, were they done any other day besides November 12th, 2019?
No.
Thank you. Okay. Do you know what the weather was like that day?
I do not have that in front of me, no.
You would agree with me, depending upon the weather, that could affect the number of people who are parking on the street or not?
There can be varying effects from the weather. On-street parking in this area that's fairly residential, I would not say a significant change in parking due to weather.
Okay. You didn't discuss in your report the availability of any street parking needed to accommodate special events such as graduations, etc., did you?
No, because special events take place at off-site locations. They're not hosted on site.
Okay. And in fact, did you actually read the planner's report that was submitted in connection with this application?
I did not review that, no.
All right. And on page 3 of the planner's report that's dated January 2nd, 2020, from Mr. Sinekis. Are you familiar with that report?
I believe I have a copy, yes.
Okay, and on page 3 of the report under parking and circulation, doesn't he say, Mr. Sinekis, the applicant should confirm the availability of any on-street parking in the immediate vicinity of the site to accommodate special events, graduations, etc.
If I may, we've already testified through a few different witnesses that there are no special events at the site.
Well, I'm just pointing out the fact that your planner says that your own expert should have addressed that issue, and he's acknowledging that he didn't.
No, that's not true. Mr. Schneikes is the board's planner.
Well,
Okay, planner.
correct. And if I may clarify, having been involved in that report, basically it was posing the question more or less as an if statement that if there are special events, graduations, et cetera, on site, that they should be addressed. Testimony's been provided that there will not be, and that's where we are with that.
And I'll make it a condition.
All right. Mr. Korak, you testified at the last proceeding hearing in this matter that it was a 5-minute drop off, right?
That's correct.
And there were board members who expressed real skepticism about that, didn't they? And they asked you about it, didn't they?
Yes.
All right. And that was in a pre-COVID world that you gave that testimony, right?
Yes.
And now, since the onset of the pandemic, you would agree with me, if you're going to be intellectually honest, there's going to be a lot more in 5 minutes to drop those children off and allow them entry into the daycare center, aren't you?
I wouldn't want to speculate on what the impacts could be and what the new regulations could be as a result of COVID. I know that a lot of businesses are required to operate at a much reduced capacity, which could offset any sort of impact in case there's a longer drop-off time resulting from COVID.
But COVID could impact the drop-off time, right?
Depending on the procedures in place, it's very speculative.
Does your report address that?
It does not, no.
Does your testimony address it?
My testimony right now is that those are very much speculative conditions, and there's not really a
world we're living in.
Understood that we're living in it, but again, with the with reduced occupancy, so to speak, that would likely come out of this. It's very unclear as to what would happen.
And your report, even pre-COVID, didn't address the different seasons in terms of drop off and how that could impact. For instance, children who have being dropped off, they have lots of jackets and coats and hats and gloves, and all of that needs to be taken off, or how that changes, right, depending upon the seasons. Your report and your testimony didn't address that either, did it?
Our 5-minute drop-off time comes from what's what I'm trying to say. Our 5-minute drop-off time comes from review of multiple learning experience sites, throughout different seasons. We didn't conduct all of those studies only in the summer. It's really throughout the year that those studies have been conducted, and a 5-minute drop-off time was determined.
Have you ever dropped off a child at a daycare center?
I have not. I do not have children.
Does weather impact the turning movements?
It's significant weather conditions. A large blizzard can impact traffic volumes in the roadway network.
I don't have any further questions.
I do.
Anybody else in the public have questions for this witness?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and address.
Sharon Fosco, 53 Park Avenue in Summit.
Spell your last name.
F as in Frank, O-S-K-O.
Okay, thank you. Let's see.
How many parking studies were done actually on Park Avenue?
We counted for that single day, November 12th, 2019.
And did you find any open parking spaces on that day on Park Avenue?
We did. 1 second, I can pull up the numbers. Anywhere from 12 to 18 parking spaces available at various points a day on Park Avenue.
And how long is Park Avenue?
Park Avenue is a very extensive street. Our study was from South Street to Roosevelt Way. So only a small portion of Park Avenue.
Okay. So you're saying that there's extra spaces from, let's say, Cottage Lane to Roosevelt? Because I never see them, and I've lived here for 16 years.
In our studies, there were extra spaces available, yes.
But you only did the study on one day, correct?
That's correct. That's very typical with industry standard. And again, we're talking about a single employee vehicle on anywhere in the roadway network, including Orchard Street, Park Avenue, Broad Street. And the Park Avenue spaces, being 1 hour spaces, are the least desirable for this particular use.
Are you aware that Park Avenue only has one side street parking on a very long stretch of that?
Yes, I'm aware.
So how are you prepared to accommodate extra spaces for drop-offs or your employees, because your employee parking spaces do not accommodate the amount of employees and then have extra spaces? So how are you prepared to do that on Park Avenue when there are no extra spaces on Park Avenue? I've lived here for 16 years. I can't even put my own car on Park Avenue because of all the other parking spaces. So how are you prepared to accommodate extra cars coming and parking on Park Avenue when it's one side of the street parking and there isn't even enough parking now for residents on the street?
I believe he's already testified that he found cars on Park Avenue. I'm sorry, he found spaces on Park Avenue.
There were spaces on Park Avenue during each of the time periods that we studied. With respect to employees parking, they wouldn't use Park Avenue because of those time restrictions. They're more likely to use Orchard Street, Cottage.
But Orchard Street is a one-way street, correct?
That's correct.
So you can't have dual side parking. And how are you expecting another car to navigate when there's already going to be enough cars parked on Orchard Street and Park Avenue? On Park Avenue, did you conduct a study by any chance about when a car is on Park Avenue to have two-way traffic? Have you witnessed two-way traffic when a car is parked? Numerous cars are parked on Park Avenue?
Yes.
Okay. I can look out my window and see it every day. It's not a steady, it's not a good flow of traffic there.
I'm just going to ask, just only questions now. You can make comments.
Okay. So from Park Avenue to Cottage Lane, is there only one way to get from Park Avenue to Cottage Lane?
Park Avenue and Cottage Lane intersect. I'm a little bit confused by the question.
Well, Orchard, which you have coming up to Cottage Lane, is a one-way street, correct?
Correct. So is the question how to get from Park Avenue, turn onto Cottage Lane?
No, I know how to turn onto Cottage Lane from Park Avenue since I've been a resident here. My question, I guess, for you is if you have people coming in from Orchard to Cottage, which is a one-way street, now the overflow of those cars now have to come onto Park Avenue and be able to make a turn onto Cottage Lane. And there's only one way out, which is Orchard. Once they turn from Park to Cottage Lane, is there only one way back out, which is Orchard Street, which is a one-way street, correct?
The site design has a driveway on Park Avenue and a egress driveway on Cottage Lane. So all vehicles would enter on Park Avenue and then exit to Cottage Lane.
Okay, I'm looking at a document in front of me. I'm not understanding how that's going to flow smoothly, but with a one-way street on Orchard, is there any other way for that traffic to be able to move on Park Avenue to not have a backup on Park Avenue? If you only have one way out, which is Orchard, which only comes out back out to Park.
So the circulation for the egress traffic onto Cottage would come around and intersect with Park Avenue. And then vehicles would turn from that intersection from Cottage onto Park Avenue.
How many times have you witnessed traffic on Cottage Lane and Park Avenue?
I've been out to the site at least 4 or 5 times.
4 or 5 times in what time frame?
These would
A
peak
year?
conditions.
A year? Within a year? 4 or 5 times in a year?
Over the course of the lifespan of this project, yes.
Okay. No further questions.
Okay, anybody else in the public have questions for this witness? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Feldman, I think you have a planner.
Yes, Ms. Cafone?
Yes, hi.
Raising your right hand. Do you swear or affirm? Why does that not look like your right hand?
It is definitely my right hand. I don't know.
Okay, no problem. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
State your full name for the record, spell your last name.
It's Christine Nazaro, Nazzaro, Cafone, COF as in Frank, ONE. Business address is 125 Half Mile Road, Suite 200, Red Bank, New Jersey, 07701.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that we accept Ms. Cafone's credentials as a planner. You're on mute, Tom.
Okay, yes, we accept her credentials.
All right. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin.
Ms. Cafone, will you be relying upon any exhibits this evening?
I will. I will be relying upon the exhibit that we just referred to, this revised site exhibit, as well as 2 additional exhibits that I believe you had pre-marked, A12, which is an aerial exhibit, and A13, which is a historical aerial exhibit.
Chris, we're going to get those up.
Someone from my team is going to pull them up, Mr. Galvin.
All right.
A little bit later in the testimony, I believe we'll need it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So Ms. Cafone, if you don't mind, can you take us through the zoning for the 2 parcels and what variants are issued this evening?
Yes, if you want to pull the site plan up, that might be helpful because then we could really talk about the 2 parcels because they have 2 different zonings. So if we could pull up what you have previously marked, I believe was A14, the revised site exhibit, that would be great.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Tatario. So the exhibit that we have before us this night is A14. And what you will see is you will see 2 parcels of land. One is known as Lot 5. We refer to that as the accessory lot. And you'll see that we're proposing 10 parking spaces on Lot 5. We need a use variance because lot 5 is in the R5 residential zone, and we have our parking lot supporting our use, which is on the other lot that is the subject of this application, which is lot 1, which is in Summit's neighborhood business zone. So you have on that lot, you have 13 off-street parking spaces, as well as the proposed 2-story, 11,000 square foot learning center experience daycare and the outside play area that totals about 3,320 square feet. That is as a permitted use in the NB zone. So there's some bulk variances, about 10 of them associated with, we'll call that lot 1 or the main parcel. But we do need a use variance because even though the daycare or the proposed learning experience is permitted in the NB zone, the parking lot where it is located, where the accessory parking lot is located, is not a permitted use in the R5 zone. So I would submit to the board that this is an inherently beneficial use application. Daycare centers and childcare centers have been widely accepted and universally accepted as inherently beneficial uses, which mean that the use presumptively satisfies the positive criteria, and we don't have to demonstrate to you that the positive criteria or the particular suitability is satisfied. Presumptively, those prongs of our burden of proof would be satisfied with an inherently beneficial use. So what we do have to do is we have to take you through the proofs for the bulk variances, which I will certainly do, as well as the proofs for the Sica balancing test. And the Sica balancing test is really a 4-prong test that's associated with any inherently beneficial use, not just daycares. And I'll go through the 4 prongs of that. And then I'll conclude my testimony with the negative criteria. And of course, when you're dealing with an inherently beneficial use, then the negative criteria is certainly important. And I'll address both prongs of that, the impact on the zone plan in Summit, as well as the impact on the public good. So to start with the accessory parcel, we are proposing to put the 10 parking spaces that you see up on A14 in evidence right now. Interestingly enough, when we did, Mr. Desario, would you be so kind as to pull up our historic aerial exhibit? I believe we have pre-marked it as 813.
This is Jerry. I don't have that one. I think.
Yeah, I'll share
pull
it.
that one up. Okay.
Yep. Is this the correct exhibit, Christine?
It is, Ms. Schweiker. Thank you. Yes. So A13 is an aerial exhibit that was put together by Jarmel Kaisel's office, and they used historicaerials.com as their source aerials. You'll see that the first aerial in what is my upper left-hand corner indicates a 1957 historic aerial. The next aerial in the upper right-hand corner shows a 1963 historic aerial, and you can see that the site is shown in 1963 as having a parking lot on it. In 1959 as well, and I'm sorry, 1959 and 1969 are the 2 bottom aerials. Again, you see that the parking lot was there in 1969 as well. So what this tells us from a planning point of view is that this parking lot has existed on this property for decades, literally for about 5 decades. There has been a parking lot. So I think it's important, and I'm not trying to submit to the board that we have any protection as a lawful pre-existing non-conforming use, and we are asking for the variance relief. But it's very important, I think, when the board is considering this application and considering how this application will impact this neighborhood, the conditions of the neighborhood and the existing conditions of the subject property are certainly appropriate for the board to consider. So I was at the last hearing and listened to all the testimony and a lot of the questions that came up from some of the board members as well as the public. And I thought it was important to this application to really paint a good history of what has been going on this property. We also looked at the title, and we know that back in 1975, because of the chain of title on the site, we know that that parking lot was transferred to Birdsall, who advertises it currently. When I was out to visit the site a couple of times, I observed signage on that lot 5 parcel that indicates that the Birdsall employees actually park there. So what is going on there today and what has gone on there historically is not radically different than what's being proposed by this application. In fact, the parking there supports a plumbing supply company, which is not an inherently beneficial use, and certainly has a very different impact associated with the childcare that operates from 6:30 to 6:30 and not on weekends. So as far as the character of the area, I believe as a planner that A13 in evidence before you establishes that what we are trying to do in conjunction with this application is not radically different that has been occurring on the site for multiple decades. There are also 3 bulk variances associated. Can we go back to the A14, the site plan exhibit? So going back to A14 and speaking again about lot 5, which is the smaller parking lot in the R5 zone with the 10 parking spaces proposed on it. In addition to the D variance, the use variance for the parking lot, we do need 3 bulk variances. Now, I would submit to the board that I believe these bulk variances are subsumed into the D variance because the R5 standards were not created or were not envisioned to design for parking lots. So to have the applicant request those bulk variances is almost unfairly prejudicial to the application because you're having them request bulk relief for something that the zone didn't envision, and they're subsumed into the D variance. But I'll identify them for the record. The first is the maximum impervious coverage, which is existing at 61.84. We're proposing 71.22% for impervious coverage, where the R5 zone only allows 45%. And again, when you contrast that with the neighborhood business zone, which is right across Orchard Street, the coverage goes up to 90% in that zone. But because this is a residential zone that didn't contemplate parking lots, the impervious coverage standards are more in line like what you would see for a single family home or a duplex home, because you're allowed 2 families here. So we are requesting that variance to the extent it's not, or the board finds it's not subsumed in the D. Similarly, for a driveway width in the R5 zone, not surprisingly, because it allows for single and 2 family homes, you're allowed a maximum driveway width of 18 feet. Because this is a commercial driveway, we're proposing 24 feet. So again, we are designing this to a commercial standard because it's a commercial parking lot where the zone has been designed to meet residential standards. And the last variance we need associated with is this the side yard setback of 5 feet to a residential zone, where we're proposing 3 feet. And again, we are introducing some landscaping and some fencing to improve the curb appeal of this parking lot, as it has existed. A parking lot has existed here for many years with what I would consider a lack of any type of formal landscaping plan. So I think when you look at the fact that it will certainly look neater and cleaner from the street, the board can consider that in its deliberations. So those are the variances that are associated with what I consider the accessory lot, or lot 5. And again, understanding that these 2 properties are in 2 different zones, and that is what's triggering the D variance on this application. That's why this board has jurisdiction. When we move over to what is the main lot, or the proposed learning center lot, that is in the neighborhood business zone. And in addition to the subject use being permitted, there are a number of other commercial uses that you could do as of right on this property. So just to give the board some perspective, which is what permissible here and what the zoning envisions for this area, in the neighborhood business zone as of right, you are permitted to have retail sales and services, personal service facilities, professional offices, dance schools and studios, restaurants and other eating establishments, but you're not allowed to have drive-throughs, as well as financial institutions. So you can see that there are a broad number of uses that are allowable in this zoning district, and the proposed daycare, there's no issue with the variance relief. We do need, however, 10 C or bulk variances associated with this main lot. And for the purposes of my testimony, I've really grouped them into 5 and 5. I've separated them because I think there's a group of them that are really related to the fact that this is an unusual piece of property. It's not, I would say, it's not common. This is not the first site that I've had that has had roadway frontages all surrounding it. But, you know, as a planner practicing for almost 24 years, I've been qualified as an expert in over 400 planning and zoning boards. So I see a lot of development applications. I can tell you that it is definitely more rare when you have a property that is bounded on all four sides by a road frontage. That puts some real practical difficulties on an application because there are certain restrictions that most ordinances, if not all ordinances, have as to what you can do in a front yard. And here you have a site that has only front yards on it. So that's why I separated those variances out, because under the statutory criteria, the board can grant the bulk variances under the C1 criteria, which is relying on unique site features or shape or size or topography associated with the property, or in the absence of any of those features, we can justify them under the C2 criteria if one or more purposes of the land use law is advanced by the application. So the ones that I think that fall under the C1 hardship criteria relating to the fact that we have the four frontages are, there's two associated with the playground fencing. We are seeking a variance for a playground fence of 4 feet versus 6 feet in height. And that's along Cottage Lane, where we have our outdoor play area of 3,320 square feet. So we have a solid fence of 6 feet surrounding that play area. And there was extensive testimony provided by our project architect, and she testified that that's for safety. We want the children to be safe, so we prefer that they have a 6-foot fence to do that. And we want there to be a visual barrier between the motoring public or anybody walking by the site and the children. So that is why we propose an opaque fence. So we do need variances for that, as you are not permitted to have an opaque fence in a front yard, and you are not permitted to have a fence of 6 feet in a front yard. It's restricted to 4. We are also seeking a variance for the setback of the proposed monument sign. If you go sort of to the other side of the site where you have the row of 6 parking, where you're on Orchard Street, you see that there's a little, what looks like a black box in the green area there. And that's where we're proposing our monument sign. That sign is set back at about 12.5 feet, where 25 feet is required in the zone. And you can see that if we push the sign back, it's going to be in the parking lot. And I think that that's really a function. Thank you, whoever is circling it right now. Somebody's taking their cursor and moving it around. You see that black box that is adjacent to the row of 6. That's where our sign is. And we need a setback for the sign. And certainly you can see if you pushed it back another 12.5 feet, it would be in the parking area. And not only would it obstruct the parking area, but it would be somewhat ineffective to the shape of the property. The other variances that we need for having, I should have talked about the play equipment in the front yard when I talked about the fencing, but that's actually a variance as well, because your zoning officer has determined that the play area is an accessory use to this site. I don't disagree with that interpretation, but it requires us then to ask for a variance because the ordinance does not allow accessory structures in a front yard. So it would be very difficult to locate outdoor play equipment on this site and not have it in a front yard, given that we have 4. And similarly, we have a variance for the parking in the front yard on this particular site. So I believe that the board can grant all of those variances under the C1 statutory criteria, given the shape of the property and given the fact that we have the 4 front yards. In addition to that, though, we need 5 other variances associated with this property. These 5, I believe, fall under the C2 statutory criteria, where in the absence of any hardship, if the board finds that one or more purposes of the land use law would be advanced, then you can certainly grant the bulk variances. Those 5 variances are the parking of 26 versus 23 spaces being provided. And you heard our site civil engineer as well as our traffic engineer both speak tonight about that. We increased the parking. The last time we were before you, we had 19 parking spaces associated with this application. And I think the testimony of Mr. Kroak certainly is compelling, in my opinion, in that he studied not only this area, but he studied what would be the demand for this type of use in other locations. And we believe that given the fact that we have off-street parking here for 23 spaces, we can accommodate our employees as well as the drop-off, given the fact that Park Avenue would not be ideal for employees to park, but could certainly be utilized for parents to drop off. I have dropped off children at daycare, so I'm not unfamiliar with how that process works. And I think it would be perfectly acceptable to utilize Park Avenue or some of the on-street parking there. I understand that there is a prohibition on more than an hour, which wouldn't really make it appropriate for the employees to park there, but it could certainly be utilized by parents in the drop-off process. So I think we will meet, we can certainly have the parking demands for this use here at this location. We are also asking for a building coverage variance. We are proposing a building coverage of 38.10%, and the zone only allows 30%. And the existing building on the subject property is at 43%. So while still non-conforming, we are improving that condition in the area or on the subject property. The other thing I would point out is that while we don't meet the building coverage, we do meet the total impervious coverage on this property. The impervious coverage, like the building coverage, is coming down, and it is more than compliant. Right now, on this property, there's an 84.33 total impervious coverage. We are bringing the overall coverage down to 71.83. And I would, as you heard prior testimony, there's no stormwater management controlling the stormwater on this site today. And we are certainly proposing a stormwater management system that will improve the drainage in this area per the testimony of our engineer. So while we do need a variance for building coverage, we are making the condition significantly better than it exists on the property today. And that goes into our next variance, which is for total floor area. In the supplemental regulations for the neighborhood business zone, there is a maximum, it's not a floor area ratio requirement. What it is a maximum floor area. And it says that, it states that, it reads that no building shall be on any lot shall be greater than 10,000 square feet. Our building is over that just a little bit at 11,000 square feet. And as a team, we've discussed this. And one of the driver for that is the fact that because this is a smaller and unusual site, we need to have a 2-story building here. And there is more square footage devoted to the stairwells and the access to have the second story. So that's why the building needs to be 11,000 square feet. If we could pull up A12 in evidence, if we could screen share that, because I did hear a lot of testimony, a lot of questions from the board, and a lot of questions really from the neighbors at the last time that we were together about this is an 11,000 square foot building. There's nothing else in the area, that's this size. And I don't agree with that testimony or those statements, because I had an opportunity on several occasions to visit the subject property, to look at the subject property. And so Jarmel Kaizel, we worked with their office and they put this exhibit together as well. And what A12—
I can't hear, I don't know if anyone else can.
You can't hear me?
I can hear her.
Who
Anybody
can't
else
hear
not?
me?
I hear her loud and clear.
I'm sorry, Mr. Galvin, who indicated that they couldn't hear me?
That was Ivan, our objector.
Mr. Novak, are you there?
I hear.
I think maybe he lost his connection. Mr. Novak?
Back, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I didn't, the witness cut out right when she was talking about how she was addressing the 11,000 square foot issue.
She's got the, she didn't get very far, and the screen is up showing the buildings that are more than that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Christine.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin. So in response to some of the concerns and statements that were made as far as the 11,000 square foot building that we're proposing, as well as the character of this area, I thought it would be helpful if we could share with the board some of the photos of some of the other buildings in the area that are commercial in nature, that are 2 stories, and while maybe not quite 11,000 square feet, you could certainly come to the conclusion that this building is not out of character with the mixed use and mixed character that exists along Park Avenue and in this general area today. So if you see on A12 in evidence, you can see the subject property that is that part of this application is in the 2 red boxes. And thank you to whoever is moving their cursor on those right now. So the 2 red boxes, the smaller of 2, of course, being just the proposed accessory parking lot, the larger of the 2 being the larger main lot with the additional 13 parking spaces and the 11,000 square foot TLE. You'll also see a proposed TLE. Now, I know that we have as a team have committed to change the architecture on the top of the TLE. So I certainly want to just acknowledge that, because the picture that you have before you on this exhibit does not reflect the new architecture. But I certainly understand that we as a team agreed to do that. But just for the purposes of presenting this exhibit, I just wanted to acknowledge to the board that I understand that we did make that proffer on that stipulation, and that this exhibit does not show or reflect the new architecture. But what you can see is when you go across Park Avenue, directly across from the subject property, there is a commercial building that has, and our cursor is over it, that has the Domino's building. It's 2 stories, the Domino's Pizza, and it's about 8,000 square feet plus or minus. Next to that building, immediately adjacent to that, is a 3-story residential building. And then there's a number of other 2-story residential buildings along that. When you get a little bit further down Park Avenue, you of course have the Roosevelt School, which is a 3-story building and 32,000 square feet. And then across from that, you have the Natal's Bakery, which is 2 stories and a little over 13,000 square feet. So I think what this exhibit does is it certainly demonstrates to the board that there are a mix of buildings in this area. There are commercial structures of multiple stories and varying sizes that one can conclude that there is absolutely nothing deleterious about the proposed 11,000 square feet of the total of the Learning Center experience building that is going to impair or substantially impair. Because when we move into the negative criteria does not ask you, the land use law does not ask you to hold us or any other applicant to a standard that there be no detriment. The standard is that the benefits of the grant of the variance outweigh the detriments. And here, when you're talking about an inherently beneficial use, that is a use that's of such intrinsic value to the community, the board can certainly consider that. So the detriment does not have to be, the detriment would have to be substantial. And I'm just simply, from a planning point of view, not able to conclude that the detriment would be substantial. When you look at the fact, oh, I should really talk about too, not leaving this parcel before I get into the negative criteria too much. I should talk about what purposes of the land use law I think would be advanced by those C2 variances that we talked about. And I do think that criteria G of the land use law, which talks about providing sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of uses, is advanced by this application. I think criteria M of the land use law, which talks about projects that lessen urban sprawl and take efficient use of the land, I think that would be advanced by this application. And I certainly think criteria I, which talks about a desirable visual environment, would be advanced by this application, as I think the buildings that's proposed, our architect talked extensively about the brick that we're putting on the first floor, and we've agreed to the concessions on the second story to make it look like an attractive building. So I think criteria I is certainly appropriate here as well. We have a statutory burden to advance only one purpose of the municipal land use law, but in my opinion as a professional planner, I think that those 3 criteria G, criteria M, and criteria I can all be associated with this application. So that leaves us to go to the negative criteria.
So,
And
Ms. Capone, I'd like to interrupt you. I just looked at the time. We're past our normal break time. Could we maybe take it before we get to negative criteria? Can we take a 3-minute break, maybe?
Sure.
I'm sure some of us might need it, and but let's keep it short. Okay.
Understood.
Okay. Be right back.
Do you think we're going to get to the other case tonight?
You have the chair.
Okay, I'm looking around. Anybody help me out? Are all the board members back? Can people tell?
Or are our neighbors on?
Okay.
I don't
Is our
believe.
court reporter here?
I don't believe she's back yet.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Ivanovich. If you wouldn't mind, what's the plan for tonight? How much longer do you think we're going to go with this application? Because I know you have another one you have to address.
Yeah, we're gonna stop at or around 10 o'clock if we're not done. And then we'll decide when to carry it to at that point.
We're
Thank you.
very close to the end, Ivan.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I took it that Mr. Feldman in the usual course was gonna probably ask some follow-up questions, so I thought he was gonna take us probably to the end.
Well,
And then-
we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
That may happen.
Yeah.
That may.
So I still won't see our court reporter.
Here I
Okay,
am.
our court reporter's back. Okay, everybody, so the neighbor's here, Ms. Snowich is here. Looks like the applicant's here. Okay, let's proceed. Ms. Gaffone, you may resume your testimony. We're back on the record.
Ready to go?
Please proceed. Yep.
Thank you. So I was speaking of the negative criteria, and the negative criteria has really two prongs to it. The first is the impact on the zone plan in Summit, and the second is the impact on the public good. So when you look at the zone plan and you look at what the neighborhood business zone envisions, the stated purpose of that zone is that the primary function of this zone is to offer a mix of residential uses and convenient commercial uses that are compatible with the nearby residential neighborhood and minimize impacts of such development on adjacent residential areas. So when the permitted uses were created for the neighborhood business zone, Summit envisioned that there certainly would be proximate and nearby residential uses, yet still allows for this use to be permissible in that zoning district. So I certainly see no substantial detriment with this proposed use and its impacts on the neighborhood business zone. When you look at the stated purpose of the R5 zone, it's the purpose of the zone is to preserve the integrity of existing single and two-family residential areas by preventing the intrusion of non-residential uses into the residential neighborhoods and maintaining existing development intensity and population consistent with single and two-family residential neighborhoods. So I think when you look at the purpose of that zone and you look at this application is not allowing or creating a situation where you're intruding into an otherwise residential site. This site is already commercial, and the R5 zone talks about maintaining the existing development intensity that specifically comes out of the purpose of that zone. So I think when you look at this application and you balance it against what has historically gone on in this neighborhood and has occurred for decades in here, I think the board can come to the conclusion that there's no substantial detriment. Also, when you look at the development regulations in Summit, as well as in the municipal land use law, specifically in your ordinance in Summit at section 35-4.2-4, child care centers are permitted in all non-residential zones. And further, and this is consistent with the municipal land use law, it goes on to exempt the floor area occupied in any building or structure as a child's care center in calculating the parking requirements. And I tell the board this when I go into the Sica balancing test, because when you do the Sica balancing test, the first thing that you do is you identify the public interest at stake. Now more than ever with childcare, with things that are going on with COVID, we understand the working parents and the absolute need for working parents to have childcare. So that is certainly the public interest. Then of course you identify any problems associated with the use. We heard a lot of testimony, a lot of concerns about the traffic and the parking and the trash. I think we've done a great job of increasing the parking on site, of bringing the trash inside, and really trying to minimize the impact on the neighborhood. Then the next step in the Sica balancing test is to look at what mitigating conditions or what conditions the board can impose on the application. And there are a number of conditions that I think the board can impose on this application. Specifically, we agreed to have no special events on the weekends. We've limited the hours from 6:30 to 6:30. The trash can be picked up. It's been brought inside and it can be picked up on whatever frequency, the board deems in the neighborhood is appropriate. So there are certainly things that you can do to mitigate the impacts on the neighborhood. And then the last thing you do is you balance that and you weigh it and you see if the variance relief that's being requested in conjunction with this application rises to a level of substantial detriment. So it would have to then rise to a level of substantial detriment where it outweighs the value of providing childcare. When you look at the goal in your master plan, you last re-examined your master plan just a few years ago, so it's a relatively new document. One of the specific goals in that master plan was to build economic resiliency by supporting reinvestment. The Birdsall Plumbing Supply business is a tired business that has been on here for decades, that has certainly less compatibility with a residential neighborhood than a daycare. It is not a permitted use in the neighborhood business zone. So this application actually eliminates a non-conforming use on that property. One of the actions and strategies identified in your master plan was to set goals that align with supporting the continued success of desirable business activities in the city while considering the needs of the residents. We know that childcare, because it's an inherently beneficial use, is a critical need for working parents. We know that residents need childcare. And we know that when you have desirable business activities in Summit, that having daycare centers near and proximate to them is important. So that's an action and a strategy that comes right out of your master plan in Summit when you look about recognizing and managing the city's position as an economic hub. So I see having a child care center as very synergistic with some of the goals that are in your master plan. So I certainly think this application meets its statutory burden of proof. I think it provides a need in the community. And while we do need certain variance relief, I believe that this application leaves this neighborhood better. And I believe that this application leaves this neighborhood more conforming with not only the R5 and the ND zone, but also your master plan in this area. And I think taken together, the variance relief that is required in conjunction with this application can be granted without substantial detriment to the zone plan or the public good. And I think we do meet the statutory criteria for the grant of the D as well as the bulk variances required in conjunction with this application.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay,
Ms. Cofone, would you mind also just quickly go through the two variances for the lighting?
Yes, I know I did. I missed those two. So those were the other two variances we need because the light poles on the main parcel. So if we can go back to 814, the site exhibit, we need two variances for lighting. And one is for the height of the lighting poles on the main parcel. They are proposed at 10 feet and the ordinance restricts us to 8. And then we also need a variance for the lighting intensity at the driveways and the security lighting. And I believe in your engineer's most recent review of this application, he's indicated we've revised the lighting plan, or he takes no exception to our lighting levels that are exceeding the requirements of the driveway. However, the rest of the site is compliant. So I think that this is really, I think, de minimis relief in the overall scheme of the application. And I think when you look at the fact that we're really only having to spill over at the driveway location and the balance of our site is compliant, and also that we're employing dark sky techniques, I think the board can be very comfortable. And I believe your staff, your professional staff, is also comfortable with our lighting plan. They've made some suggestions, we've implemented those suggestions. So I think you can grant this variance as a C2 variance where it's really just a better zoning alternative, because we certainly want our driveways and we want our sites to be properly and safely lit, but done so in a way that it's not going to have a negative impact on the property, so on the adjoining properties. So I think you can rely on criteria M for that. Again, an efficient use of the lands. And I think that there's no substantial detriment. And I believe we have satisfied your professionals with the lighting plan that we've amended since the prior application.
No further questions at this time.
Okay, Mr. Variance, on behalf of Burgess Associates, do you have any questions for the planner to help us understand?
I do have two items that I wanted to discuss. And the first is really a question for the applicant's planner, and really for the purpose of creating a complete record. So there's no question the daycare use itself is inherently beneficial. However, the use variance is actually for the off-site parking facility on lot 5. So I question whether the inherently beneficial daycare use actually subsumes the off-site parking facility. And so while recognizing the parking is related to the daycare use, I think it technically stands by itself. And based on that reasoning, it would seem that the Medici case criteria would apply, and that the applicant would have to demonstrate the site is particularly well suited in addition to addressing the negative criteria. I believe that some of the planners, Ms. Caffone's testimony has already addressed some aspects of that. But again, I question whether or not that is really the appropriate standard that should be used for in evaluating the off-site parking use itself.
So if that were the case and you didn't consider it to be inextricably linked to the daycare and it had to sustain its D1 proofs for a non-inherently beneficial use, the only change would be that we'd have to demonstrate the site is particularly suitable. So when you look at the fact that the property has been utilized for literally decades as a parking lot, it would be very difficult for employees. It's been utilized as an employee parking lot. It would be very difficult, I think, to come to the conclusion that there's something now that there's been a change in the character of this area that would render it not appropriate, particularly when the fact that you're introducing drainage and you're introducing landscaping and you're basically cleaning it up and making it look certainly with greater curb appeal and look cleaner and neater, and I think better to be accepted into the neighborhood in that way. I think our aerials that we presented speak for themselves on that, and the site is certainly suitable. It's an undersized lot for the R5 zone, so I think it's certainly particularly suitable for the proposed parking lot. As
Tom,
far
what's your
as
next question, Tom?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What's your next question?
All right, just one more. So it's regarding the bulk variance for the requesting the 11,000 square feet versus 10,000 square feet. Ms. Caffone, you've given some examples, notably the public school and bakery, based on what I could see, were the only ones above 10,000 square feet. You also gave some testimony regarding the consistency of the proposed development with the surrounding neighborhood. Are there any other, or can you testify as to the sizes of other learning experiences elsewhere in New Jersey in terms of square footage or bulk?
I think that the subject application is consistent with other learning experiences. I understand it for a 2-story learning experiences. Many of them are not 2 stories. So I think that this is a 2-story structure. So you have to take into consideration, like I said, the additional stairways and things that are required. There is an 8,000 square foot building directly across the street from this, and it's a commercial building. So while not quite 11,000 square feet, not radically out of scale with what we're proposing either.
Okay. And I just wanted to clarify again with the justification for that in addressing the C2 criteria. I think you mentioned that the issue is whether or not there were any substantial detriments, but I think it's actually the inverse, in that the public benefits of such a variance must substantially outweigh any detriment. So really the burden is to demonstrate, again, the public benefits substantially outweigh any detriments.
Well, this is an inherently beneficial use, so we would certainly substantiate.
Okay, so I'm getting to that. So it is inherently beneficial use. And so under the case law criteria for the Sica case, the board can impose reasonable conditions. And in establishing the zone criteria for the NB zone, the city has determined that 10,000 square feet is acceptable for the number of permitted uses in the zone, including a daycare facility. So I guess the question would be at this point for the board is, or perhaps for you first, is one, can the school operate with a conforming building size of 10,000 square feet or less? Or is the board satisfied and convinced that there's enough testimony to justify the increase to 11,000 square feet? Again, based on your testimony about larger buildings in the area and neighborhood character. So that's my final comment.
Well, I think the testimony certainly supports the justification for the 11,000 square feet. We are eliminating a 15,000 square foot building that is a non-conforming use on the subject property. So the board can certainly look at that when they're considering this application. The board specifically made some requests for us to modify the architecture of the building, which we have agreed to. So I think the board can consider the proposed architecture and the style of the building and the curb appeal. And I think that given the fact that this is a challenging site and the applicant needs to do a two-story structure here, and the fact that we need the additional, it's just an additional 1,000 feet. So we'd be permitted to have 10,000, we're asking to go to 11. And I don't think, like I said, that that's radically out of character. It is larger, yes, than the building that's directly across the street from it, but I don't think it's substantially larger to the point where it would rise to the level of not outweighing the public benefits of allowing the not only the elimination of a non-conforming use, but the construction of an inherently beneficial use.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, board member questions. Mr. Spur, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Steiner, any questions?
Yeah, I've lost count. How many variances are we asking for each site, and how many in total?
So Mr. Steiner, I think your question was how many variances are we asking for? There's 10 bulk variances associated with the main parcel. There are 3 bulk variances associated with the accessory parcel, and there's a D variance associated with the accessory parcel for the parking lot in the R5 zone. So that would be a total of 14 variances.
And we're balancing these against an inherently, well, that gets to our executive session. So.
Yes. We're holding.
I don't know of any.
Christine, don't respond.
Okay.
I could not hear Mr. Steiner's question at all. It was very, very low.
I did. He asked about the variances and he needs guidance from me when we get into executive session about how to make the determination based on the variances involved.
Okay.
Rather than go back and forth because you don't have that kind of time, I'd rather wait.
All right, Mr. Steiner, any questions? Any other questions?
No, he's good, Tom.
All right, I can barely hear him. Ms. Newell, any questions?
I can't yell any louder.
Ms. Newell, any questions?
No.
Okay. Mr. Mullen, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Male, any questions?
No question, no.
Was that no questions?
No
questions.
Mr. Liketts, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, public, questions.
Ivan?
Yes, I have some questions.
So please state your name and address again, please, for the record.
Sure, Ivan Novich, I-V-A-N, last name Novich, N-O-V-I-C-H, 53 Park Avenue, Summit.
Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. All right, Miss, it's Capone, right?
A phone with an F.
Capone, sorry.
That's okay.
Lot 5 is a residential zone, is that right?
It is.
And are there any other commercial parking lots in the R5 zone?
There are not that I know of, no.
All right, and with respect to the 11,000 square foot commercial building, if we go to that exhibit, I think it's item 7A, right? This is one. So you're pointing to the commercial building, the 2 stories, 8,000 square feet. Can you hear me okay?
There's a little bit of an echo, but I can hear you.
All right, I'll back up. You're saying that that's comparable to what the learning experience is proposing on lot 1, right?
I didn't use the word comparable. I said it's a commercial building, it's 8,000 square feet, and I acknowledge that our building was 3,000 square feet larger.
Okay, so you're saying it's not comparable.
I didn't use the word comparable, that's your word. I said it was similar.
Okay, so it's similar. Now, in the that commercial building, that's 8,000 square feet, do you know how many stores or businesses are actually located in that building?
There are several.
Do you know how many?
I don't know exactly how many.
Okay, but it's somewhere between 3 and 5. Would you agree with me?
I don't know exactly.
Doesn't know. The answer is no.
Okay. So there's Banderas, which is a restaurant. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Okay. And Park Avenue actually has a large Costa Rican neighborhood. Did you know that?
I don't have any information on the ethnicity of the neighborhood.
You're not familiar with the neighborhood, are you?
I am familiar with the neighborhood. I've been there several times.
Okay. So, but you didn't know that Banderas is a Costa Rican restaurant that serves the neighborhood, which is, there's a large population of Costa Ricans who live in the neighborhood. What about, did you know that there's a hair salon there, a small hair salon that's located in that?
I did know that, yes.
Okay. And the Domino's Pizza is in there too?
That's on the corner, yes.
Okay. Do you know what's above those businesses?
There appear to be residences above those buildings.
So there's residential living space above that building. Are you including that in the 8,000 square feet?
Yes,
You're including the residential.
it's part of the structure.
Okay. Now, Natal's you pointed to as another similar structure in the neighborhood. Natal's actually isn't on Park Avenue, is it?
It is not.
Do you know if there's any residential living space above Natal's?
I don't know if they're occupied. And you can see it from Park Avenue, though. You can definitely see it because when you drive to the end of the site and you drive along Park Avenue, the Natal's Bakery business is clearly visible from Park Avenue.
It is not.
Okay, but it's at least a couple of blocks away from lot 1, isn't it?
Oh, from lot 1, yes. It's not visible from the subject property, but it's visible from the right of way of Park Avenue.
So if I'm standing at the learning experience, and can I see Natal's?
Probably no, you can't.
Okay, Roosevelt School you also pointed to as a similar structure in the neighborhood, is that right?
I just pointed it out as a structure that's 3 stories and a larger structure that's along Park Avenue in the neighborhood.
Do you know what's in there?
It's a school, yeah.
No, it's not. It's a residential apartment building, ma'am. There's
There's
no
no
school.
idea what this block is all about.
There's no
One at a time.
There's no school in there. There hasn't been a school for years. It's residential apartments.
So it's an apartment building.
Yeah, it's an apartment.
3-story building that's 32,000 square feet.
Yeah, but it's filled with residents. You know if there are any businesses in there?
I don't think so.
Okay, let's talk about lot 5. Going back to that, do you know if historically has lot 5 been a paved and lined parking spots?
I'm sorry, I didn't, was your question, is it a paved and lined parking lot?
Yeah, so you showed some diagrams from the 50s and 60s aerial footage that purported to show lot 5, and you were making the claim that it historically has been used as a parking lot. And my question to you is, do you know historically whether that lot 5 has been a paved parking lot? Well, let me ask you this. Do you know if it's a paved parking lot now, ma'am?
If it was paved at one time, it's definitely looking very overgrown. So it's very hard. It looks like if it was paved at one time, it's in a very state of disrepair.
Did you
I
know?
don't know historically if it was paved at one point, but it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of overgrowth and growth on it now.
Okay. Do you know if it's paved now?
I don't know if it's when the last time it was paved. It does not look like it's a paved parking lot with delineated stripes on it.
Okay. So if I told you it's not a paved parking lot, it's like a rock-based parking lot, you wouldn't be able to disagree with me, would you?
I wouldn't be able to disagree with that, but I've been out to the site and there's clearly a advertisement or a sign that is employee parking lot associated with the Birdsall application. So whether it's paved or not, it's definitely being utilized as a commercial parking area.
Okay.
That I'm certain.
I didn't ask you about that, but do you know if it's a line parking spots? Do you know if there are lines in there that along are there line or demarked parking spots lined?
There does not appear to be demarked parking spots with hairpin striping or something.
Now, I know you don't live in the community, but do you know if members of the community use that parking spot or have used that parking spot historically?
I don't know if I know that it's a Birdsall commercial parking lot. So if the neighbors, I don't know if they illegally use someone's parking lot in the neighborhood. I don't know the answer to that.
So you don't know whether historically it's been a parking lot that's been devoted exclusively to employees, do you?
I don't know if it's been devoted exclusively to employees.
Just going back to item 7A, if we could go back there.
I think that you're referring to A13 or A12 and
Yeah.
evidence of 7A.
7A, exactly. Oh, no, sorry, the other one. Yep, thank you.
A13, yes.
Thank you, A13. Do you know if there are any other childcare centers in the area?
I don't think so. Certainly none that are 11,000 square feet.
Okay, so let's look at your own exhibit here, ma'am. All right, do you see the Learning Circle YMCA? It's at the bottom of the screen.
I do, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna represent to you that is a learning daycare center. Do you know if what I'm saying is true or untrue, or can you dispute that?
That's really not, we didn't look at that structure specifically. You couldn't see it from the subject property. It's not in the same block as the subject property. I know that the YMCAs often do have daycares associated with them. I don't know if that one offers a daycare program or not.
Mr. Chairman, can we just understand what the line of questioning? Competition is not a relevant question.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Galvin, is this a relevant line of questioning?
Well, I think the neighbor wants to go to the question of, do they need it? But the problem with that question is that there is a specific state statute that encourages daycare.
So if I could respond or no?
You can respond, but the law is the law, and I can't change the law.
No, I'm not asking you to change the law, but my point is she's bringing up, the applicant's bringing up in testimony that's an inherently beneficial use. And I think it's fair for the board to consider the number of daycare centers in the neighborhood within less than a mile radius.
But
There's
your logic is smart. And I agree with your logic. I understand your logic. But the inherently beneficial use doctrine doesn't usually go to the issue of how many are out there. Every once in a while, there's this discussion of, you have one hospital, that's an inherently beneficial use. If you have 3 hospitals, when does it become a nuisance? But more often than not, the answer is it's an inherently beneficial use. It's a use that the state legislature is encouraging and does not want boards to deny without some incredibly good cause. The fact that there are other daycares in the area is not enough to dismantle its protection as an inherently beneficial use.
Is it a factor the board can consider?
I'm doing this for 30 years.
Yep.
And I've tried to make your argument before with things like cell towers and have been beaten up terribly in the courts.
I don't think in fairness, I don't think that's my argument. I'm just saying and you correct me if I'm wrong, because this isn't my area of the law, but my question to you is it a factor that the board can consider? Not that
in my opinion, it's not an appropriate factor.
Okay.
They can consider the Sica balancing test is where your focus needs to be. The Sica balancing test accepts the fact that the use that they're proposing is a good use and is considered socially important.
Can they consider the size of the use? If you're not challenging the use, but the size. So we're not talking about a 50 daycare. We're not talking about daycare center for 50 children. We're talking about for 155. That's a big difference. So can the board consider, well, and I think this goes to Mr. Barron's point, that it's not 11,000, but maybe 10,000. I could be wrong. If it was a smaller daycare center with a smaller number of children. So we're really not talking about the use. We're just talking about the size.
I think when you're talking about the size, I think you're fine on that, but I still don't think it matters if there are other daycares in the area, how many. And it certainly doesn't go to the whether or not it's actually inherently beneficial use. But with that, I want to call timeout.
Okay.
Mr. Yuko?
Well, it's 10 o'clock. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, I have a feeling that our neighbor has more questions. And, when I'm feeling the pressure, maybe I'm not as patient as I should be. And I want to be very, very patient and listen carefully.
Yeah, I think we need to honor our commitments and call it a night for this particular hearing. I hate to do that at this point, but that is the agreement we had when we started. It's now 10:02.
If I may, I'd ask Mr. Novich, how many more minutes does he thinks he has realistically?
I also have
Yeah.
questions.
Well, it's not, I have at least 15 more minutes or so of questions, and depending upon what the witness says, it might be additional questions. And my wife is also indicating that she has some questions as well.
And then they're going to have comments.
We haven't even gotten that far.
Well, we will finish this on July 6th for a fact. So bring your best questions and comments.
You got it.
So I hear the mention of July 6th, Mr. Nicole. What else do we have on July 6th?
Well, the Unitarian Church is technically on there, but from what their attorney is saying, they're going to wish to be carried off that, which would create some room for that.
Hey, Chris, I guess they couldn't pull themselves together, huh?
Well,
I don't get that joke, but we don't have time for jokes tonight.
Okay, Unitarian.
Yeah.
Oh, now I get it. Okay.
Anyway, all dad jokes aside, so
I'm slow.
July 6th is feasible for everybody. There's 2 other residential cases on there, but given there's not, a bunch of testimony, it's more neighbor oriented at this point. We can probably place this on and go from there.
So we'll
if we could be first on the agenda, we greatly appreciate it. This matter is going back to, I believe, an August filing. It's coming up on a year. And we just ask that we just given the opportunity to finish up next time. We'd greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, we normally do residentials first, but we'll give you the first slot that evening as well. So that's my promise to you.
All right, so at that time, we will bring back Ms. Cafone.
Hey, Craig, we're going to do that, but we're in the middle of COVID. We're doing a Zoom meeting, and we've been nothing but gracious to your client and your operation.
And we appreciate that.
Okay, I just want to make it clear. This isn't like we're holding up the developer and you guys haven't been treated unfairly.
Not at all.
All right, cool.
So are we going to pick up with my questions or no?
We'll pick up right with you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
And anybody else that wants
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Oh, no, only Ivan's questions.
Trust me, he can speak for the whole street.
I can see how that's working out.
Because 3/4 of the street weren't even aware of the meeting tonight, which was a little unfortunate.
Okay, well, let's have a motion to carry this case to July 6th, with the applicant waiving the time which the board has to act and whatever else we need to have on the record for that.
Move to Stephen Spur moving to carry to July 6th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Wait, stop, everyone stop. Craig, did you say yes to the extension of time? of the
Yes,
waiver?
thank you.
Okay. Steve made the motion. Who made the second?
Second, Liz.
Thanks, Liz.
Sure.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so that case is carried. So now we're moving
Thank you.
on to Jonathan Flax, 57 Prospect Street.
Great. Mr. Chairman, if I can begin then. So this is Rob Simon from Herald Law as to Mr. Flax's property, block 2709, lot 15, 57 Prospect Street. And just very quickly, I know it's late, just to remind the board that that this board back on May 6th of 2019 granted certain variances to this applicant, and we've already gone through the reason why we needed to come back before the board. But again, just to remind the board, we have decreased the deviation for which variances were previously granted. We originally got a 12-foot variance where 15 feet, 9.2 feet variance where 15 feet is required. And now we're up to 12 feet for the left side setback. Total side yard percentage was 25.8% versus 35%. We're now up to 28.6%. So we've decreased the deviation. And we also received a setback, left side setback for a generator of 5 feet. And we've also pushed that back to 7.8 feet. So again, we took the 3 granted variances from approximately a year ago, which run with the land. In each case, we reduced the approved deviation. And we already went through some of the conditions and the comments that were made by the board in that resolution from 2019. And again, to remind the board, we're still intending to build essentially what the board approved by variance approximately a year ago, with all reconstruction taking place in practically the same location. So it's essentially so that it was being restored to a safe and lawful condition, and with some additional improvements to address some concerns specifically from neighbors that have arisen in connection with the current application. So let me explain to you quickly what we're going to do tonight. As I mentioned to the chair at the commencement of the hearing at approximately 7:30 a number of hours ago, that what we're going to do is we have 3 witnesses. We're going to have Mark Gimigliano, the engineer from Dykstra Walker, basically walk through the latest revisions to the plan, which really are primarily focused on the landscaping improvements to the various sides of the property. We also have with us Mike Knapp, the certified landscape architect, who's going to also comment about the proposed plantings that are contained in the Dykstra Walker plan, which will also include, of course, a review of Mr. Linson's letter that we received recently based on his most recent review of the application and going on site. And then we also have Mr. Peter Steck, our professional planner, who is prepared to give some brief testimony regarding the variances that are required as part of this application. So without further ado.
Okay, stop.
Yeah.
Did you work it out with your neighbor?
Yes, but I'm going to get to that in 5 minutes.
You're sure?
We'll find out in probably 4.5 minutes.
Okay, because the board's been going since 7:30. I don't want the whole dog and pony show. If we need to hear that both sides are resolved, the board may not need a whole lot more testimony.
Understood. I just want to put that on the record, Mr. Galvin. Thank you for that. Yeah. So if I could have Mr. Gimigliano. Mark, you're present?
Yes.
And Mark, you understand you've been previously sworn?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Spell your last name, Mark.
I'm sorry?
Spell the last name.
Gimigliano, spelled Gimigliano.
My mom's maiden name is longer, Romagnola. Go ahead.
Mr. Gimigliano, you've since the last hearing, you have revised your engineering plan with the latest revision date of June 4th, 2020, correct?
That's correct.
And you submitted that plan accompanied by a letter dated June 5th, 2020, correct?
That's correct.
And that letter and that engineering plan that have been submitted to the board both include landscaping improvements that affect essentially both sides of the property, both the Burke side and the Chule side, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you very briefly, as instructed by Mr. Galvin, just go through those changes?
Yes, the changes we made to the plans are basically the things we talked about at the last meeting. We showed the plantings proposed on the Burke property that were originally proposed by the Todd Group. That's Ms. Burke's landscape architect. We show 4 Norway spruce trees and 3 green giant arborvitaes on her property. We also removed 11 plantings along the Burke property line to make room for those trees. Those were 7 shrubs, a Norway maple, and 4 green giant arborvitaes. And then finally, we changed the Norway maples on site to red, October Glory red maples. After the meeting, there was further discussion between our landscape architect and the Burke landscape architect with the removal of 7 additional green giant arborvitaes along the property line. So those have been removed from the plan as well. And then finally, there was a meeting on site on June 4th with the city forester, Mr. Linson, the applicant's landscaper, and Ms. Chule, the neighbor to the east. And at that time, we agreed to remove a willow tree, a shrub along Ms. Chule's property line, and add additional green giant arborvitaes along her property line. And those are shown on the plan as well.
Okay. And with regard to what's shown on the plan, that is consistent with Mr. Linson's recommendation that he submitted to the board recently, correct?
That's correct.
And with regard to particularly the property on the Chule side, that notwithstanding Mr. Linson's report, your understanding is that the applicant has also had communications with Ms. Chule regarding the proposed landscaping, essentially on the side of the property that's closest to her property, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And your understanding is that as a result of those communications, that the applicant has agreed that notwithstanding the size of the green giant arborvitae that are contained in Mr. Linson's report, Mr. Flax has agreed to increase the size and have a minimum of 5 green giant arborvitae, 12 to 14 feet in size at the time of planting in the area where the willow tree will be removed along the property line, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you understanding that the applicant has specifically committed to taking care of that in terms of doing those plantings in November of 2020.
That's correct.
And you also understand that with regard to the discussion with Ms. Chule as to the removal of existing trees along Prospect Street, that while some of the trees will need to be removed in the front of the Flax driveway this fall, that most of the remaining trees will not be removed until toward the end of the construction completion. You know, like, so for example, like when utilities are going in.
That's right. That's the plan.
Okay. And the applicant also agrees that Ms. Chule will be advised in advance of the tree removal along the roadway to ensure that passage on her driveway is safe throughout the tree removal process?
Yes.
And that's your understanding with regard to the discussions with Ms. Burke to the left, essentially, and Ms. Chule to the right, correct?
Correct.
And other than that testimony, in terms of the minor changes to the plan to increase the size of the green giant arborvitae, the landscaping will be consistent with what is contained in your Dexter Walker plan with the most recent revision date of June 4th, 2020, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And your understanding is that Ms. Burke and Ms. Chule find the plan as augmented by your testimony this evening to be acceptable, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
I have nothing further for Mr. Gimigliano at this point.
So, Mr. Galvin, we have some representations there that go beyond what's in writing in the forester's report and the landscaping. What do we need to document that?
Well, I was just going to put the applicant is to abide with its agreements with both of its neighbors. And then maybe Mr. Simon can give me that in writing, which we'll attach to the resolution.
Okay. Is that acceptable, Mr. Simon?
Yeah, that's acceptable. We can work out the language, assuming that there's an application that's granted, in terms
This
of.
way you're not dragging me into it.
Right.
Art has a question as well. He's got his hand raised.
Okay, Bart, I don't see you, but I guess you're there somewhere. There you are. Your mic's
You're
on mute.
You're muted. You're colorful, but you're muted.
I'm sure he's just being complimentary of me, that's all.
The statements by Mr. Gimigliano in response to the questions submitted by council reflect the agreement with the absence of one statement that needs to be added, and that is that access for planting the additional materials, plant materials on the Burke property will be provided by through the Flax driveway when the plants are planted.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we made that representation at the last meeting, and that continues to this day, of course.
All right.
You guys will put that all down in some kind of simple document.
Yeah, as far as Dennis's observation, between the decision of the board in the event that it is a favorable decision and the adoption of the resolution, I'm sure that the attorneys and Mr. Galvin can come to an appropriate statement of a resolution of the issues, at least between Burke and Flax, that will be acceptable to all.
Okay.
And they will be certainly consistent with all representations that we've made throughout the course of this proceeding.
Agreed.
Okay. Any questions? Well, let's go down the line quickly. Mr. Spur, any questions of this witness?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Steiner?
No.
No. Okay. I saw the wave at the last second. Ms. Newell?
No.
No questions. Mr. Mullen?
No.
No question.
Mr. Malay?
No question.
Mr. Loikis?
No questions.
Okay, very good. Anybody from the public have questions for this witness?
Seeing no one, Mr. Chair.
Seeing none. Okay. Another witness? Oh, wait.
I just wanted to reiterate the memorialization of what Mr. Simon said in terms of what was agreed to.
Okay, for the record, please state your name and address.
Cornell Choulet at 55 Prospect Street, and my husband, Eric Sorensen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the public have a question? Seeing none, Mr. Simon?
Yes, so I would like just to very briefly just call Mr. Knapp. I see Mr. Knapp there. So Mr. Knapp's our landscape architect. Mr. Knapp, you've been previously sworn. Do you understand that? You have to unmute yourself, Mike.
You're on mute, Mr. Knapp. Adam, there you go. Spell your full name. Spell your last name.
K-N-A-P-P.
And you remain under oath. Go ahead, Mr. Simon.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Galvin. Mr. Knapp, you've been present this evening virtually during Mr. Gimigliano's testimony as to his latest landscaping plan, his letter to the board dated June 5th, and Mr. Linson's latest arborist report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you, as a certified landscape architect, concur with the findings and recommendations that are contained in all of those documents?
I do.
And you heard the augmenting of those documents by way of agreement with Ms. Choulet, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you are supportive as a certified landscape architect with those changes to the plan?
I am.
So you can do all those crazy things you told her you can do?
Whatever I said, absolutely.
Okay.
Other than the term quote unquote crazy, I have no further questions from Mr. Knapp.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from board members? Mr. Spur?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Bart may have had a
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry,
Sorry,
Bart.
Tom.
Mr. Sheen, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Knapp, your response to Mr. Simon's question also includes the memorandum of John Linson, originally submitted and dated February 20th, 2020. Is that correct? That's the memo in which he addresses the Burke property.
I don't know that I've ever read that document.
Yeah, just to refresh your recollection, Mr. Knapp, that's the document that was issued by Mr. Linson in which he made a recommendation that certain plantings be put on the Burke property and taken care of by Mr. Flax. And pursuant to the testimony that has been presented through the course of this application, the applicant has agreed to do that, specifically via the last hearing, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Spur, I think you said you had no questions, correct? Okay, Mr. Steiner.
No questions.
Okay. Ms. Newell.
No questions.
Okay, Mr. Mullen.
No questions.
Mr. Mollet.
No question.
And Mr. Liketts.
No questions.
All right, thank you. Anybody in the public have a question for this witness? Seeing none, okay. Did I hear something? No, okay, seeing none. Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to call briefly Mr. Steck, our professional planner.
Not previously sworn, we didn't even get to him, right?
We have not gotten to Mr. Steck yet. He's been waiting very patiently.
Do you swear or affirm a testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your full name for the record, spell your last name.
Peter G. Steck, S-T-E-C-K, 80 Maplewood Avenue, Maplewood, New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, we're familiar with Mr. Steck as a planner.
We're very familiar. We accept this qualification.
Fire away.
Thank you, Mr. Steck. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Galvin and Mr. Chairman. Mr. Steck, you're familiar with the plans and the application for the Flax property?
Yes.
And you visited the property in the surrounding neighborhood, correct?
Yes.
And you have an exhibit, I believe it's marked A11.
I believe so.
Okay, and that exhibit, I checked earlier today, has been on the municipal website. If you would, I don't know if Chris, if you can go to that exhibit.
I'll put it up.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yep. So Mr. Steck, what is on the screen has been identified as A11. Can you please identify the document?
Yes, this is a series of slides, I believe a total of 8, excuse me, a total of 9 that were last amended on June 11th of this year, and they were prepared by me.
If you can just briefly go through your slide presentation.
Yes. Slide 1 shows where the subject property is. It's irregular in shape because there's a stream next door and it's split zoned. The back half is in an R10. The front 2/3 is in an R15. Next slide, please. This is an aerial photograph that shows how the zone line does go through the building. And while they're both single family zones, there are different dimensional standards that apply to each zone, as you would expect. The R15 is less dense than the R10. Next slide, please. The third slide is taken by a drone provided by the applicant, and this is the current condition of the property looking toward Prospect. So on the right, you see the Burke dwelling that's about 100 feet away from the subject dwelling. And on the left, you see the stream at the corner of the property, and then the garage and the Sorensen Chalet dwelling, both of them much closer to Prospect Street. Next slide, please. Another view that shows the outlines of the property. The building in back, again, is back much further than the front property line. The reason being is that originally there was just a rectangular small building in the back of the property. It has been significantly changed over time. It's been altered not only on its facades, but with two additions that prior to any demolition activity made it a U shape. Next slide, please. This is from the front of the subject property. You can see part of the excavation that had ceased. And then this is looking toward the Burke property. This was taken May 28th by me, and I believe accurately depicts the existing conditions at that time. Next slide, please. Slide 6 emphasizes where the building is. What is significant is the back rectangle was actually where the original rectangular building was. This, as the board knows, is in the Prospect Street Historic District, but the nomination form on the back side says that it's a non-contributing building. And that essentially means that because there have been so many modifications over time, you can't recognize what was there. And were this not in a historic district, it would not be a historic building. The only reason it is, it's considered a non-contributing building in the historic district, again, because it's been altered so much. We are keeping the basic location toward the rear of the property rather than up front. And that is in line with its historic location. But again, the architecture, at least in terms of preserving what was there, is to a large degree not a factor because it's a non-contributing building. What this emphasizes is on the left side of the property, there's a blue line that shows the required setback. So as this application was modified over time, the back portion of the building in the R10 zone does meet the side setback of 12 feet. As you move past the ridge line toward the front, it is encroaches by 3 feet from the 15-foot requirement, which is a different requirement. So in all aspects, as this application has been modified, the setbacks, side setback to the west has been increased. The square footage of the building has been reduced by 40 some odd square feet. We still need a variance for the 12-foot westerly side yard. We need a variance for the total of both side yards, but we do have more than the minimum on the east side of the building. Next slide, please. These slides were taken by me on February 29th of this year. The first one is obviously looking straight toward the property from Prospect. The second one looks from the back portion of the subject building toward the Burke residence. And as I mentioned, the residence is more than 100 feet away in this location, but also it is higher in elevation. And there is already greenery there that, as mentioned earlier, some of it is going to be replaced as you go more toward Prospect Street. Next slide, please. This is a slide taken by me more recently. I'm standing at the back edge of the garage, looking toward the Chalet property. And again, now the greenery is in bloom. As you go toward the Chalet property, there is a driveway and a garage, and then there's a small green space on the other side of the garage. Next slide, please. These are simply two more slides. These were not taken by me. They were taken by Mr. Flax on June 2nd, but in my opinion, they represent accurately the existing conditions. This shows the Chile garage and somewhat of a similar view of the dwelling. I can now go more into my conclusions if Mr. Simon would like me to.
Please, yes, I would like you to, Mr. Steck.
Okay. This property is unusual in shape. It's in a historic district, but it's not a contributing part of the property, not a contributing member of the district. We need 3-dimensional variances, all of which were granted before by the board. I don't know what that, they were granted by the board. So what's unusual about this is if we had not discovered that the foundation was deteriorated and it was a hidden foundation, if this building perchance had burnt down, it could be rebuilt because the variances traveled with the land. But the reason we're here is that there were different circumstances than were initially before the board. There's also a provision of the ordinance with respect to non-conforming uses that you can repair them. You can make them safe for public safety reasons, and you don't need a variance to do that as long as they're not becoming more non-conforming. And that's the case here. We found that there were safety issues with the foundation. Rather than building and letting it collapse in the future and then having a right to repair it, we thought it wise to repair it at this stage. In my opinion, this could be approved under either a C1 or a C2 argument. In terms of C1, we have an existing building here that's been there for a long time. We have an unusual lot shape, partly because there's a stream and partly because there's a flood hazard area. So that limits what we can do with the property. So I do think there is a hardship issue connected with this. There is a equally potent rationale for a C2 variance where the benefits substantially outweigh the detriments. We're preserving at least the historic location of the dwelling. Were we to demolish everything and build it up at the front property line, which the zoning would allow, in my opinion, it would be more intrusive. The architecture of this building is very similar to what was recommended for approval by the Historic Commission. It's hard to really notice any differences without having a discussion with the architect and actually finding out what they are. So there is, in my opinion, an aesthetic improvement. There's an advancement of historic preservation, at least in terms of the location of it. There is clearly an issue of safety that's being improved because we're replacing the foundation where it was inadequate and would potentially compromise public safety. In terms of the negative criteria, again, the location is largely the same. Both properties on both sides are being screened. Screening is not a requirement in the sense that these are not incompatible uses. They're all single family homes. But in terms of negotiating with the neighbors, we are adding landscaping on both sides, which in my opinion will fill in the area, which is somewhat of a wooded area with mature landscaping. So someone, in my opinion, driving down the street is not going to know any difference. The one visual difference, frankly, is going to be the removal of the trees that are diseased with the emerald ash borer in the front. We're going to keep those trees up as long as we can until we get into the construction phase. But in my opinion, someone riding down the street will consider this building more compatible with historic neighborhood than what was there before. What was there before was modified. It was a Cape Cod design. There are no other Cape Cod designs in the entire historic district. So I believe that the positive criteria are met under either a C1 or C2 rationale. And I believe that this could be approved without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantial impairment of the zone plan and zoning ordinance.
And with regard specifically to the C2, Peter, in terms of the positive criteria, do you agree that it satisfies the purpose to promote the conservation of a historic district?
Yes, again, this is a non-contributing building. The architecture is not the important feature. The feature, in my opinion, is where the original building was located, and we're preserving that openness, which I think is complementary to the two adjacent homes.
And that the application is consistent as presented significantly with what was presented and approved back in May of 2019, correct?
Yes, the changes have been to make the side setback more conforming, and the square footage of the building has been reduced. And again, the architecture, in my opinion, is from the point of view of someone riding down the street or walking down the street, is virtually identical to what was originally proposed.
And so for all the reasons that you stated, that the application meets for the variances requested, both the positive and the negative criteria under C1 and C2, correct?
That's correct.
I have nothing further from Mr. Steck.
All right, thank you, Mr. Steck. Very succinct and to the point, and I appreciate the relative brevity. Thank you.
I would like to go home too.
Yeah, well, I'm home. Mr. Variance, anything you want to question Mr. Steck on to help us with this?
I have nothing further to add. I thought it was good testimony. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Sheehan, did you have anything? I wasn't sure if you raised your hand.
I do not, no.
Board members, Mr. Spur, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Steiner?
No question.
Okay.
No questions.
I got it that time. I need a hearing aid for Joe. Ms. Newell?
No questions.
Okay. Mr. Mullen?
No questions.
Okay. Mr. Male?
No question.
Mr. Likett?
No questions.
Okay. Anybody in the public have any questions for this witness? Okay. Seeing none. Okay. That was your last witness, Mr. Simon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that concludes our testimony. We want to thank the board for being very, very patient with us over these months, some very trying months, and for listening very intently to our witnesses over the course of a number of hearings now. But we do feel very passionately that the application certainly should be granted, not just for all the reasons that we've stated, throughout the course of the testimony and through the evidence that have been presented, and not just because the application is substantially similar, if not almost identical, to the application that was presented to this board back a year ago, but in the very, very unique circumstances that we have here, where we actually are even making it better than what was previously approved by this very board approximately 1 year ago. And certainly we want to thank our Mr. Sheehan, Miss Burke, Miss Choulet for assisting us essentially in coming up with what we are very proud to have as a wonderful project in the city of Summit. And we thank the board for its consideration.
All right. Thank you for that. Anybody in the public want to tell us what they think about this case, pro or con? Okay, seeing none. That's a good sign. That sounds like a summation, Mr. Simon. It sounds like you're ready to rest your case.
Yes, and again, we just want to thank the board.
Okay, very good. Mr. Galvin, you're there. And want to summarize the conditions?
Yes, just two at this point, which was the one that I already said, the applicant, Mr. Simon's going to give me, he's going to work it out, give me all the details into what's happening on both of these lots. And so it's going to say the applicant is to abide with its agreements with both of its neighbors, which shall be attached here to as Exhibit A. And then the applicant must comply with the board's engineer's letter, which is going to be Exhibit B.
Okay.
And I also, I'd like to tell Mr. Flax that Mr. Simon has done a yeoman's job here trying to get everyone lined up. And, probably not feeling too good about this right now, but he did a great job to get this back on track.
I concur. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And all right, so who'd like to start deliberations?
Well, I'll start, Joe Steiner. I supported this application when it came up a year ago. It's gotten better. and we've solved, thanks to everybody's willingness to talk and come to some agreement. We've solved the neighborhood problem, and I'm looking forward to the block party when they finally have one after it's all done. So I am prepared to support it.
All right, thank you. Anybody else want to chime in? Well, I'll just add that, I've been on this board a long time, and it's been, you don't often see situations like this where there is so much give and take. And obviously there was a lot of serious discussions, and I'm sure some hard feelings along the way, and a lot of give and take and a lot of back and forth. And I just want to compliment everybody involved, the applicants for being flexible, the neighbors for being flexible, for, I guess everybody wanted the same result. They wanted the best possible house and the best possible landscaping and all that. And it seems like we've gotten there after many, many tries, and I'm sure it's going to be a great house and a great project. So I'll support it as well. Anybody else have anything to add or any contrary thoughts or
make a motion?
Stephen Spur, I'll make a motion to approve.
And Liz Newell, second.
All right, Vice Chairman Spur.
Resoundingly yes.
Mr. Steiner.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Newell.
Yes.
Mr. Mullen.
Yes.
Mr. Malay.
Yes.
Mr. Loikitz.
Yes.
And Chairman Yuko.
Yes. Good luck with your project.
Thank you very much to all of you. Stay safe.
Rob, stay on the line.
I will.
Rob, Chris Dower. Chris, stay on the line.
Okay.
Chris Nicole, I need you to stay on line so I have the link. So
Okay. But we have one other
like 2
board
minutes.
matter. We have one more other board matter to take care of. I messed up earlier. When we're going through the agenda, I didn't flip over to page 2 when reviewing the cases. And I neglected to mention May Lau and Christopher Cow, 19 Highland Drive. We need to carry that case. They requested to be carried, and they waived. They did waive in writing the time which the board has to act. Is that right, Mr. Nicola?
Yes, Ms. Alfonso submitted a letter.
Yeah.
So who's making that motion?
A motion to carry. So
I didn't mention the date. Did I? July 6th? Just want to be sure.
Yes, July 6th.
Who's making the second?
Second.
Thank you.
Welcome.
You're awesome.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, so meeting's adjourned, but some of you were
We
staying
have to
online?
formally cancel tomorrow?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. We need, yes, cancel tomorrow's meeting. That's right. We need a motion.
I can publish I'll publish a notice, post it to the website, and everything
I'm
will
just
be.
not showing up.
Yeah, it's good. Don't worry about
Could
it.
do that too. I mean,
But do we need to do a motion or?
No, we're good. We're
Okay.
good. All right.
All right.
Tom, I'll talk to you tomorrow for sure.
Okay, so whatever you're doing now, you're giving me for this, right?
I don't need you. No.
Okay.
Okay, so the
All
rest
right,
of us
bye.
have to leave. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
bye.
Or we can stay and eavesdrop.